We are now ready to mobilize it. Now that we've identified which project, process, policies, or programs we need to conduct a PIA on, we move on to mobilizing it by setting up your team, determining the resources needed, and identifying the stakeholders who will be involved in the process. Next is conduct. Once you've done with the preparation, you're now ready to conduct your PIA. When conducting the assessment, make sure that you consult the stakeholders identified and analyze the risks through a risk map. This risk map assesses the probability and impact of the potential risks and threats. With this, you can immediately determine which process, program, or policy you need to prioritize, so you may provide timely and appropriate controls to prevent or mitigate the risks. So you now have your risk management plan. The last step is implement. Before you can deploy the risk management plan, you would need to get a sign-off from the top management. Just make sure to include in the plan its regularly scheduled monitoring and revision, which at the very least should be done annually. For now, this is your Privacy Commissioner, Raymond Enriquez Liboro, thanking you. Keep on watching. Now let's talk about privacy risk management. To understand this better, we need to start by defining risk. It refers to the potential of an incident to result in harm or danger to a data subject or organization. Your risk could be unauthorized collection, use, disclosure, or access to personal data. It includes risks that the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the personal data might not be maintained, or possibly even the risk that processing might lead to violation of the rights of the data subject, or the privacy principles of transparency, legitimacy, and proportionality. After identifying the risk, you will need to ask.
Distinguished guests and delegates, a pleasant morning. We will begin in 15 minutes. Again, we will begin in 15 minutes. But before we officially begin, here are some house rules. This conference will be recorded for reference of discussions and agreements. The following information will be processed during this teleconference: name, profile photo, text, audio, and video data. Input questions in the Q&A chat box. To reduce one's footprint, do not deviate from the agenda and try to solve technical problems on your own. When posting photos of the event, remember to use our official hashtag, #PAW2021. Thank you.
Now let's talk about privacy risk management. To understand this better, we need to start by defining risk. It refers to the potential of an incident to result in harm or danger to a disclosure or access to personal data. It includes risks that the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the personal data might not be maintained, or possibly even the risk that processing might lead to violation of the rights of the data subject, or the privacy principles of transparency, legitimacy, and proportionality. After identifying the risk, you will need to ask a few questions. Number 1, is it a threat? Number 2, will it make the data subject or organization vulnerable? 3, what will be the impact of the incident to the data subject or organization? Number 4, what is the probability of something happening? If threat is a potential cause of an unwanted incident, which may result in harm to a system or organization. Vulnerability is a weakness of an asset or group of assets that can be exploited by one or more threats. Impact is the severity of the injuries that may arise if the event does occur. Probability is the chance of an incident occurring. Now, let's visualize an identified risk by using a risk management map and examine how we may minimize or handle it. This starts with identifying the probability and its potential level of impact. The levels of probability range from 1 to 4, where level 1 is unlikely. This means that the risk is not expected, but there is a slight possibility it may occur at some time. Level 2, possible, means it is a casual occurrence and may happen at some time. Level 3, likely, means it is a frequent occurrence and there is a strong possibility that it may occur. Level 4, almost certain, means it is very likely to happen and is expected to occur in most circumstances. Meantime, impact is measured in 4 levels, from negligible to maximum. Impact level 1. It means that the data subjects will either not be affected or may encounter a few inconveniences which they may overcome without any problem. Level 2. It means the data subject may encounter significant inconveniences which they will be able to overcome despite a few difficulties. Level 3, which is significant, means the data subject may encounter significant inconveniences which they could still overcome but with serious difficulties. Level 4, maximum, means the data subject may encounter significant inconveniences or even irreversible consequences that they may not overcome. To complete our understanding of the risk we want to manage, let's take a look at the risk map. The risk rating is computed this way. Impact multiplied by probability equals the risk rating. Based on the formula, if the risk rating is 1, this is negligible. 2 to 5, low risk. 6 to 9, medium risk. 10 to 16, high risk. To illustrate, a risk factor with the lowest probability and lowest impact would get the lowest risk rating on this matrix, which means negligible, and therefore does not require any mitigation. Meantime, on the other end of the scale, a risk factor with the highest probability and impact gets a risk rating of 16, which means high risk and demands urgent mitigation. As a rule of thumb, unless the risk is negligible, your goal is to directly address all identified risks to lessen the risk ratings to a minimum. Coming up next, a video on the third pillar of accountability and compliance, how to be accountable by crafting a privacy management program and creating your privacy manual. For now, this is your Privacy Commissioner, Raymond Enriquez Liboro, thanking you. Keep on watching. Hello, I am your Privacy Commissioner, Raymond Enriquez Liboro, and this is the video edition of the Data Protection Officer Briefing of the National Privacy Commission. Here we will talk about the Data Privacy Act and the basic principles of data privacy, plus a few pointers on data protection and compliance. First, we need to understand the concept of privacy. It was United States Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis who described privacy as the right to be let alone. This means that you have the right to be protected from unnecessary intrusions in your private life be it about your physical body, your territorial space or location, or access to your communication and information. The Philippine Constitution guarantees the protection of the fundamental human right of privacy. To reinforce this and to ensure the free flow of information and to promote the innovation and growth in the 21st century, our lawmakers created Republic Act 10173, known as the Data Privacy Act of 2012. The DPA, or the Data Privacy Act, protects your personal data in any medium, whether on paper or electronic form. The objective of the DPA is to strike a balance between ensuring the free flow of personal data and protecting the privacy of the data subject. To achieve this objective, the National Privacy Commission was formed as a regulatory body. The National Privacy Commission, or NPC, is a quasi-judicial body mandated to administer and implement the DPA, as well as to monitor and ensure compliance of the Philippines with international standards. The NPC is mandated to develop policies to effectively implement the DPA, act as an advisory body on matters affecting personal data protection, educate the public on data privacy, data protection, and fair information rights and responsibilities, perform compliance monitoring functions, receive complaints, and conduct investigation on matters affecting personal data, and enforce the law, its implementing rules and regulations, orders, resolutions, or decision. Let's define some terms, starting with personal information. Personal information refers to any information, whether recorded in material form or not, from which your identity can be reasonably ascertained by the entity holding the information, or when put together with other information would directly identify you. How about sensitive personal information? This differs from the first in that it contains more in-depth information about you, such as your health, education, genetics, your sexuality, and other personal data that are more sensitive in nature. Let's now go to processing. It is any operation or set of operations performed on your personal information, including collection, recording, organization, storage, updating or modification, retrieval, consultation, use, consolidation, blocking, erasure, or destruction of data. Let's move to the people or entities involved in the Data Privacy Act. First is the data subject. This is you, the individual whose personal data is processed. Second is the Personal Information Controller, or PIC. PIC refers to a person or organization who controls the collection and processing of personal data. The third entity is what we call the Personal Information Processor, or PIP. It is the entity outsourced by the PIC to process personal data on its behalf. Remember this, there is criteria that must be met in order for personal data processing to be deemed lawful. The criteria will depend on what type of personal data is to be used. Is it personal information, sensitive personal information, or privileged information? By the way, privileged information refers to all forms of data which constitute privileged communication. Examples of this include communication between husband and wife, doctor and patient, and attorney and client. Here is a rule of thumb when processing each type of personal data. If it is personal information, then yes, processing is generally permitted, unless expressly prohibited by law. If it is sensitive personal information, or SPI, then processing is generally prohibited, except in specific cases when it is allowed by law. If there are any violations, the penalties are steeper when sensitive personal information is involved. The Personal Information Controller and Personal Information Processor have three main obligations under the privacy law. The first obligation is to adhere to the general principles with respect to the collection and processing of personal data: transparency, legitimate purpose, and proportionality. Transparency implies openness and accountability. This general principle states that the data subject must be aware of the nature, purpose, extent, and risk involved in the processing of his or her data. Transparency also means that the data subject knows who the PIC is and is provided information about how to exercise his or her data subject's rights. Legitimate purpose. This general principle states that the processing of personal data must be compatible with a declared and specified purpose, which must not be contrary to laws, morals, or public policy. Proportionality. This means that personal data being processed must be relevant and should not exceed the
Distinguished guests and delegates, a pleasant morning. Before we officially begin, here are some house rules. This conference will be recorded for reference of discussions and agreements. The following information will be processed during this teleconference: name, profile photo, text, audio, and video data. Input questions in the Q&A chat box. To reduce one's footprint, do not deviate from the agenda and try to solve technical problems on your own. When posting photos of the event, remember to use our official hashtag, #PAW2021. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to day 2 of the 4th National Data Privacy Conference in celebration of the Privacy Awareness Week 2021. My name is Joan Medalla from the Legal and Enforcement Office, and I will be your host for today's sessions. Yesterday, we had several breakout sessions on various informative topics. We hope that you were able to learn from these sessions, which will help you in your day-to-day functions as data protection officers or as you live your lives as responsible digital citizens. And today, we have lined up several informative and interesting sessions on data protection and privacy. We will also announce the winners of the first data protection of the first Privacy Awareness Week Awards, so stay tuned in. Now, for our first session today, we are very privileged to welcome one of the world's leading experts in privacy law, Professor Daniel Justin Solove. Professor Solove is the John Marshall Harlan Research Professor of Law at the George Washington University Law School. He is also the founder of Teach Privacy, a privacy and cybersecurity training company. Professor Solove has lectured at various universities, companies, and government agencies around the world. He is a prolific author of numerous books and textbooks on privacy, such as Nothing to Hide, The False Trade-off Between Privacy and Security, Understanding Privacy, The Future of Reputation, Gossip and Humor in the Information Age, Privacy, Law Enforcement and National Security, Consumer Privacy and Data Protection, Privacy and the Media, and many more. He has written more than 50 law review articles in the prestigious scholarly journals in the US, contributed to amicus briefs before the U.S. Supreme Court, and has served as a consultant or expert witness in a number of high-profile privacy cases involving Fortune 500 companies. Prof. Solove will provide his expert opinion and analysis of the privacy paradox, or the phenomenon where data subjects say that they value their privacy rights, but their behavior suggests otherwise, when they readily give out personal data or fail to safeguard the same. Ladies and gentlemen, I am very honored to welcome one of the world's leading experts on privacy law, Professor Daniel Justin Solove. Professor, good evening, and you have the floor.
Thanks so much for having me. Today, I am really thrilled to be able to talk to you about some of my thoughts on privacy. This is a topic I've been working on, writing about, teaching for more than 20 years now, and I'm really delighted to speak to this audience. I see up here my first slide in my presentation is here. I don't know, is it okay if I show my share my screen?
Yes, Professor, you may share your screen.
Oh, great. Okay, I'm gonna go and where that go? Okay. Okay. Is it doesn't seem to be. Do you see this? Do you see my slideshow?
Yes, okay. We see it now.
Okay, great.
Okay, sorry.
What happened to the? Okay, so you can see it now. Okay, great.
Professor,
Yes.
we can't see it.
Oh,
Sorry for
okay.
that.
You can't see it?
I cannot. Professor?
Yes. It's not, I can't seem to be able to share it.
Professor, your screen is already viewable.
Okay, so you can see it now?
Yes, Professor.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, great. So,
Is it possible to have it on slideshow so our viewers may be able to see it properly?
yes, let me do that. Do you see it now?
Yes, that's perfect.
Okay, great. Yeah, it takes me off the screen entirely, so I don't see the little applet or anything, but I'll go without it. The topic of my talk this morning is the myth of the privacy paradox. The privacy paradox is a term that has been spoken about quite a lot. If you do a Google search for privacy paradox, you'll pull up 7,000 different results on this term, various papers and books that have been written about this. This is something that has been talked about for quite a long time. And basically it's this. Whenever people are asked, do you care about privacy? People will say, yes, I care tremendously about privacy. If you take polls about privacy, people will the numbers will come back with 70%, 80%, 90% saying that they care a lot about privacy. And this is consistent. People care about privacy. They'll say it over and over again. They really care. And various researchers conducted studies of people. They would ask them, do you care about privacy? And people would say, yes, I care about privacy tremendously. And then they would conduct an experiment. They'd ask them something that would be something to sacrifice their privacy. So they'd ask them, hey, will you give up your social security number or ID number for something small, like a small discount? And people would give it up. Or people would go to a website and engage in behavior that showed that they didn't value privacy. And so there's a disconnect. What researchers saw was there's a gap. People said they value privacy, but they behaved as if they didn't value privacy. And this they called the privacy paradox. People claim they value it, but then actually in their behavior don't seem to value it. And this has resulted in a lot of discussion and debate about privacy, and also about how to protect privacy. Should the law protect privacy if people aren't behaving in ways to protect it? This has led to two reactions to this, and kind of would take the different reactions to this and categorize them into two arguments. One is the behavior evaluation argument, and the other is the behavior distortion argument. I'm basically taking the whole landscape of things written about this, which has been a ton of things, and I'm going to put it into two categories. And I think everyone can be classified into one of these two categories. So the behavior evaluation argument says that, in fact, you should look to behavior as the right metric for the value of privacy. And so what's really accurate isn't the polls. The polls and what people say about their attitudes about privacy, that doesn't really matter. What matters is what people do. And what people do is that they don't protect their privacy. So these scholars and politicians and policymakers and others, commentators, will say, you know what, the law is protecting privacy too much. Because if you look at people's behavior, they really don't care that much. And the law is overprotecting privacy. And therefore, we should have less protection in the law. The law should be lightening the protection because it's too much. It's in response to these polls, but the polls and the stated attitudes are wrong. The behavior really shows that people don't care that much. So those are the behavior evaluation folks, and they see the privacy paradox, the implications of it, as leading to less regulation, that we really shouldn't be protecting privacy as much as we should. Now, on the other side are folks that argue what I call the behavior distortion argument. And this argument takes the other position, that the attitudes control, not the behavior, that we should look at the attitudes rather than what the behavior is showing us. They say that the behavior isn't accurate to measure how people value privacy. And it's inaccurate for a number of reasons why we shouldn't look to the behavior. And they point to a number of things. Now, I will say that, of these two arguments, I am much more in the camp of the behavior distortion argument. Ultimately, what I'm going to argue to you today is that actually I think both arguments are missing what I think is the real best response to the privacy paradox. So even though I think that there's a lot of merit in the behavior distortion argument, I ultimately am going to say, I think that there's another point that's even more important than this. But let's go through and talk a little bit about the behavior distortion argument, because I think it's actually has some interesting things in it that are worth thinking about. So the behavior distortion argument goes that there are a lot of things that can skew the way that people behave. It could be the way that choices are framed. It could be dark patterns. Dark patterns are various manipulative designs or ways of phrasing things that induce people to behave in certain ways that are against their interests. So, they kind of trick people into acting in certain ways. And so that, it's not a real indication of people's behavior because they're not acting, they're being fooled into making choices that are contrary to their privacy. There's a lot of ways that behavior can be manipulated. And there's been a lot of studies by behavioral economists and social psychologists that show that different ways can be structured to get different results in people's behavior. So the endowment effect, if you give someone something, they're much more likely to fight to protect it than if they don't have it and they have to work to earn it or have the possibility of getting it. They act and value it very differently. There's a lot of other ways that, depending on how questions are framed, you get very different responses. So there's a lot of ways that people's behavior could be manipulated on privacy so that companies who want people to make choices that are sacrificing privacy, where they want people to give up their privacy, they can frame things in ways to get people to do that. So the behavior distortion folks say, well, behavior isn't really a good metric because it's so malleable. You can make people do a lot of different things depending on how you design things. They also point to the fact that there's a lot of misunderstanding and lack of knowledge when it comes to what people know about privacy. So people might give up certain things like information because they don't understand the implications and the consequences of doing that. And that can be because you give up information. You're asked a small piece of information. Tell me about, what did you buy at the supermarket? Tell me a couple things you bought. And you tell someone, oh yeah, it's not that a big deal. I bought this soda. I bought some vegetables. Doesn't seem that big of a deal. But one of the things in the modern world with very sophisticated algorithms and predictive analytics on data is that companies and governments are able to go through massive amounts of data and be able to make inferences about people based on the data. So in each instance, someone might think, hey, I'm not giving up that much information. I'm just giving up a little bit here, and that's not very telling about me. The problem is that when you add it all up together, it starts to say a lot about a person. And if you gather this all up together and then you do this analysis on the data with sophisticated algorithms, you can make inferences about people and learn a lot more about them than what they had expected. And it's very hard for people to, it doesn't mean they don't value their privacy. It means they don't fully understand the implications that giving over a small piece of data here and there over a long period of time could have implications and reveal information about them that they didn't expect to be revealed. So there's a lot of, got you, that people are surprised. They don't fully understand what the privacy harms are. And then another thing that could lead to these behaviors is inertia and friction. There's just sort of a natural inertia. Whatever you set the defaults at, whatever they're set at, whether they're set at share the information or not share the information, share with friends, share with the public, share with whatever the defaults are, most people don't change the defaults. And it's not just because they like the defaults, it's because there's the inertia. Most people don't do an action. So setting the defaults actually has tremendous power, because whatever the defaults are, that's going to be what most people wind up sticking with. I don't think that indicates anything. It doesn't indicate what their real preferences are, because they haven't thought about it. They haven't looked at it. They haven't bothered to look at the defaults. There's also another thing, friction. Friction is the difficulty and time that it might take to do something. So, people might say, you know what, I care about privacy, but I don't want to go and spend all this time going through privacy settings and reading long privacy policies. That takes a lot of time and effort, and it's really cumbersome. And all I want to do is complete my purchase or look at this article or do whatever. And so a lot of people don't bother with that. I mean, probably a lot of you have experienced this. When you go to a website now, with a lot of websites, this thing pops up about cookies. Do you accept the cookies on the website? And then there'll be something that'll say, well, if you don't, you can go to this other thing and you can go through and read all about cookies and read up on your cookie options and decide which cookies you want to accept and not. And for most people, they don't want to be bothered by that at that particular moment. They want to do their transaction or read what they're reading. They don't want to sit there and start suddenly thinking about cookies. That's not what's on their mind. That's not what they're trying to do. It's a side detour that is taking them on something they don't want to focus on at that point. And that doesn't mean they don't care. It just means that at the moment it's an interruption, and it's an unwanted interruption. And so that's how a lot of these things ultimately function. And so people just click accept to make it go away so they can keep going and do what they really want to do. Now, all this, the behavior distortion folks say, doesn't mean that behavior is an accurate reflection of attitudes, and that attitudes are what we should look at. Now, ultimately, I come out on this in a different way. I want to argue that neither behavior evaluation or behavior distortion has it right. And I think that even though there are some, I think, very valid points in the behavior distortion argument, I think ultimately there's a different explanation for the privacy paradox. And ultimately, my explanation for the privacy paradox is this: there is no paradox. I'll repeat that. The privacy paradox is a myth. There is no paradox. Paradox assumes that there's some kind of, absurd contradiction in things that should be the same. But I want to say that they're not the same. The attitudes about privacy and people's valuation of privacy is not the same as their behavior about privacy. So it's not a paradox that they don't match up, because they're different things. And I want to explain what this means, because the implications of this are very important. It means that trying to make them equivalent when they're not is the wrong direction. And it's the wrong direction for policy. And there are going to be implications for what the law should do, how the law should go about protecting privacy. A lot hinges on this. Very, very important. So this is why I want to spend a little time explaining this point, because this really affects what the law should do and how we should ultimately protect people's privacy. So ultimately, what's going on is when people are asked, do you care about privacy? Do you value privacy? That is a statement about value. People value privacy. People can value privacy in a couple different ways. One is they can value their own privacy. I care about my private life and keeping it protected. Also, there's generally the value of privacy. That privacy, not necessarily about me, but just privacy for everyone, is important for society. It's important to protect in a free society. So I might say, you know what, I don't think my own privacy is important here, but I value your right to protect your own privacy, even if I don't think this matter is private. I want you, if you care about this matter being private, you should be able to protect it. And it's important that you have this right for democracy. That's a value of privacy. So I think privacy is valuable for these two reasons. There's some things that I think value privacy for me, but also I respect your decision about what is important for you. And I think it's valuable that you have that right to make that decision. Now, that is different than what the behavior is showing us. The behavior is showing us what people are doing in particular situations. And these are risk calculations in particular situations. And they're actually not really as much about the value of privacy as they are risk calculations in these contexts. And these risk calculations in these contexts can really only tell us, the conclusions that we can make about them can only tell us about the risk calculations in those contexts. They don't say much about the value of privacy. So that is what's going on. So when the behavior evaluation argument that says you look at behavior and then that shows that people don't value privacy, that is a logical fallacy. They are making an improper generalization from people's risk calculation in a specific situation to their value of privacy more generally. And that is wrong, because that risk calculation and decision has nothing to do with the value of their value of privacy. Now, I'll go to this, and I'll use this to kind of show you that this point, this cartoon, and then I'll go back to the other slide to illustrate this point a little more. So this cartoon, as this guy is crawling in the desert, you know, desperate for thirst, about to die, and all of a sudden this guy says, "I'll give you this water if you just give me some information about yourself." This person says, "Sure, what do you want to know? I'll tell you anything." He's desperate for a drink. And the guy says, "People really don't care much about privacy these days." Well, what can we conclude about this? What I'm trying to show with this cartoon is that this doesn't mean that people don't care about privacy. It means that in this context, when someone's facing a decision that, you know, they have to give up information to save their life, they're going to give up the information. But it doesn't mean they don't care about privacy. It just means that in this context, when they look at the risk, you know, dying of thirst in the desert versus giving up information, they make the choice to give up information. But see how this doesn't have anything to do, the conclusion this has anything to do with how they value their privacy really doesn't follow. Now, I'll go back to this slide. This is something I do in an article. I wrote an article about this, and I put in a kind of a fun little thing for a pop quiz, because I thought a concrete example would drive home my point. And so here's the example. If a person shares the name of her favorite book in exchange for a $1 discount from a particular online bookstore, what can be concluded from this behavior? And this, I want to go through each choice, because I actually think, you know, thinking through each choice will show what I mean logically by why certain things follow or don't follow from the behavior. So the behavior is sharing the name of a particular favorite book in exchange for a $1 discount from an online bookstore. So the first conclusion that some people want to make from this is that this person values privacy at only $1. Now, this is wrong, and it's wrong because of a bunch of things. One, this isn't about generally privacy. I mean, this is just about the book. You know, this person might think that the book is not a big deal. In fact, maybe they wrote about their favorite book on a blog post or in public. So they don't really care. That's not anything they care about protecting. That doesn't mean they don't value privacy. They might say, well, I still value other things about me I don't want to be known. So all you can conclude here is something about my book, right? And that's also what makes B wrong too, right? That this person values her own privacy at only $1. The first one I said values privacy writ large, so that person could value privacy as a social good. The second one, what about this? Does say anything about the person's own privacy? And the answer is no, because again, this is really about a book. It's not about every piece of information about the person. So I don't think we can make any conclusions about how the person values her own privacy here. So that choice is wrong. Way too broad a conclusion based on what we see from this behavior. So let's narrow it down a little bit, and we'll get to C. The person values the privacy of her personal data at only $1. Now we're going to take privacy and put it into the terms of personal data. So there's a lot of other dimensions of privacy that don't necessarily involve data, but let's just say it's just data. We'll know that's wrong because again, it's too broad. It's all their data, and this involves a book. So let's look at D. D is more narrow. The person values the privacy of her favorite book at only $1. Now it looks like we're getting closer. We're getting more tailored. However, again, privacy can mean a lot of things more than just, data. So let's look at E. E seems to be right? It looks good. The person values the data about her favorite book at only $1. And I submit that this choice is wrong too. Why is this wrong? Well, it's wrong for a number of reasons. First, the value of the data this is about sharing the name of her favorite book with a bookstore. It's not sharing it with the world. It's not sharing it with a stranger. It's not sharing it with the government. It's sharing it with a bookstore. So in this context, the risk isn't that the world finds out about the book. It's that this bookstore finds out about the book. So again, it's not the person doesn't value or only values the favorite book at $1. It's that they only think that this bookstore doesn't present a risk to them or a big risk. Now, they could say, look, this bookstore has policies. They protect the data, right? It's more than just the sharing it with them. It's the security of the data. It's the use of the data. And they say, look, I'm not worried. This bookstore is not going to do anything bad with the data. I've shopped at this bookstore for many years. I know the bookstore. Their policies are good. Their security is good. They're regulated by the law. So we have the legal protections are relevant. And they don't share it with anybody. All these things are relevant to making that risk calculation. So it doesn't mean anything that you share the book with a particular bookstore. There's nothing broader than you can conclude about that. So really, what can we conclude from this statement here, from this behavior? Well, all we can conclude is that a person has decided in this context for this particular book that sharing that information with just a particular online bookstore, not every bookstore, but just this bookstore, is worth the risk to get the dollar, that they don't see a significant risk of that. But it does not say anything about how they value privacy or even the data about the book, because they might have a different reaction if the government says, we want to know your favorite book, or if another company that they don't know says, we want to know your favorite book. So all we can conclude about this is a particular risk decision in this particular context. So that, I think, is really important. That's what the behavior is telling us, but it's not telling us what people or how people value privacy. So this then goes to my last point, which is what should we conclude about this, and how does this impact what the law should do? Because one of the things I think that's going on when people are giving up their privacy, giving up information so many times, so readily online. Why aren't people, for instance, like it's true that the researchers are showing us that these studies are showing us, and we can see it from facts too. People don't seem to opt out of a lot of things. They don't take a lot of steps to protect their data in a lot of contexts. They don't go and get, they have all sorts of rights that the law gives them to exercise to get information about access to their data and to correct their data, and they often don't do that. They don't exercise these rights. So one conclusion is, well, people don't really care. And I think that's the wrong conclusion. I think that the conclusion that I draw from this is that there's a problem here. And the problem is that the law often relies on something I call privacy self-management. And this is that it relies on people taking steps to manage their own privacy. And I submit that this is a very difficult task for people to do. It's a task that people really will struggle to do well. Even experts will struggle to do this. And ultimately, it's a task that doesn't scale, that it ultimately is impossible for people to truly manage their privacy well across all the different sites. So I'm going to go through some of the problems with this and why this model doesn't work very well. So it's one thing, for instance, to manage privacy on one site. You go to Facebook, I can do my privacy settings on Facebook. And, it takes some time, right? If I want to read their privacy policy, figure out my privacy settings, go to my settings, make all the settings the way I want them, that takes some time. Now, okay, I'll do it for Facebook, but I have accounts at hundreds of other websites. I visit newspapers and magazines and various other sites. I go have accounts at Amazon and all sorts of other companies, all of which are gathering information, all of which I have some ability to find out information from and gather data about what data they have about me. I don't have time to do it from all those companies. It's going to take me forever if I'm going to manage my privacy at all these different companies, because we are dealing with hundreds, sometimes thousands of companies. And so to manage your privacy with these companies and scale it up to all of them is almost impossible. It doesn't scale. It works great for a few companies, but it doesn't work that well when we're dealing with hundreds or thousands. I don't have the time, and most people don't have the time. Beyond just not having the time to do it, there's also another problem, and that is that it's very hard or difficult to actually make a good risk calculation about privacy in a lot of situations. So, should I share information on Facebook that I'm going on vacation, going on a trip, and should I share where I'm going? Well, I can look at that and say, okay, what's my risk? Well, it's hard, right? Maybe someone could find that out and rob me while I'm away. Maybe there's that information could be used in some way about me, but I don't know that. That's in the future, and with a lot of information that people share, they share little bits and pieces of information, and each time they share, it's innocuous. It's not a big deal. But the fact is that when you take this information over time, sophisticated algorithms can analyze this information and look for patterns in the information. And with machine learning, what happens is the artificial intelligence will look at all the different patterns that all sorts of people are looking at, and then from the patterns that they see by looking at everybody's data, they then make a prediction about you. Because if you match what a lot of other people are doing, that's how the algorithm learns that, well, if your pattern is similar, you're likely to like similar things. So this is how Amazon book recommendations work, right? You buy 10 books from Amazon, and Amazon sees that a whole bunch of other customers have bought many of those same 10 books, and they also bought an 11th book. They're going to think, well, hey, well, you bought these 10 and they bought these 10 and they bought this one, you're probably going to want to buy that one. And that's how they work. So the laws will often say, hey, you get a right to see the data that these companies have gathered about you. So let's say they give me the data that they gathered about me. What does that tell me about my risk? Nothing. I don't know. I need to know what they're going to do with it. So they need to tell me, what are you going to do with it? How are you going to use it? How are you going to make a decision about me? Well, to do that, I need to know what algorithm is going to use it. How is this algorithm going to understand my data? And what is it then going to do or decide about me based on my data? So then they can say, okay, we'll give you the algorithm, which a lot of laws don't require, but let's say that it does. Give you the algorithm, get the algorithm. Now I have the algorithm, and now I have the data. I still can't make a judgment because I need all the other data that gets fed into the algorithm to know what the patterns are, to know how the algorithm is going to make a decision. The algorithm is just going to say, well, it's empty, right? It's just going to say, oh, we're waiting for the other data and we're going to wait for the other pattern. So I need everybody's data at this particular moment to then see how the algorithm will play with my data. That's impossible. You can't get all that. So it's impossible. Like, I get these disclosures. The California law now gives people the right to get, information about the data that companies have about them. So I get the data. Big deal. I still, it's not meaningful to me. Yeah, they have a lot of data about me, but I really want to know, what are my risks? What are they going to do with it? How are they going to analyze it? What decisions are they going to make about me about it? And then I can figure out what I want to do. But I don't know those things. And it's almost impossible to know that and manage that. It's really hard for a person to do this. You have to be really sophisticated. I'm a privacy expert, and I can't even tell you how a lot of these algorithms will make decisions about me. So I can't really make the calculation. What I often see is the benefits are immediate. They're concrete and immediate. Cool new technology. You can do this. Here's a cool app that can do something really neat. It can take your picture and turn you into, like, this is how you would look if you were a cat. Make you into, here's your cat self. Oh, cool. I see a benefit. This is fun. Privacy is, well, what could they do with that information? What information are they gathering? And then what are they going to do with it? It's all speculative. It's hard to say. I don't know, and I don't have enough information to make that judgment. So I see immediate benefit, speculative, vague, uncertain privacy on the other side. And of course, privacy loses. People decide, okay, I can't really figure out what the harm is, so I'll do it because I see an immediate benefit. I don't think that means that people don't care. It just means that we're not protecting them well enough. So ultimately, then what should we do? What should the law do? And I think that the law can do a number of things, but I think it actually has to start thinking about privacy a little differently. And learning the lessons that I talked about, I think that the lessons are that that privacy, in a way, it needs to be kind of more like the way things are when you go to the supermarket or when you buy a car. When you go to a supermarket, right? I go and I want to buy some food, and I don't have to go and then figure out, okay, I'm going to buy milk. Is this milk safe to drink? I don't know. I have to find out. I have to research, what farm did the milk come from, and is the milk pasteurized or not? What, if anything could be in that milk, it could kill me or not kill me. That's kind of risky. But I kind of know when I go to the supermarket to buy milk, I know it's safe. I know it's safe because the government has looked at it and figured out what the minimum standards are for safe milk. And I know that someone's figured this out. I don't have to worry about, hey, is the milk safe or not? I know that someone's looked at it. When I get on a plane, I don't have to worry about, do I have to look at the records to see how well the pilot is trained? And do I have to, look at, no, I can kind of say, look, the government is regulating the airline and it's going to be safe. I buy a product in a store. It's not going to start bursting into flames because we have laws that mandate it be safe. And I don't have to sit there and figure this all out for myself, because I don't have time. I don't have time to become an expert on milk and every farm and every place that I buy something and every like what should a pilot be trained in, and I don't have time for that. And same thing, consumers don't have time to become privacy experts and to really figure out all the things that data analytics can and can't do. So that's why we need the law to help them figure that out for them. Now, I'm not saying the law should become overly paternalistic, but I think the law needs to do a lot more and realize that what is feasible for people to be able to do and what's asking too much that people really can't do. And I think that a lot of times people can't do the self-management. And so that's why I think we see the behavior that we see with privacy, why people aren't doing all these things. It's because it's impossible. And it doesn't really help people what they really care about, which is, I don't want to be harmed. I don't want my data used in a way that's going to hurt me. I don't want decisions made about my data that are going to affect me in negative ways. That's what people want to stop, but that they're not given enough in the behaviors they're told to do for privacy to actually achieve it. And so that's the problem. I'll leave off there, and I'll let me stop the share, and I'd be happy to chat and answer some questions. How do I get the share off of here? Oh, there it is. Okay. I think I am. Is my screen still sharing, or is it not sharing anymore?
Thank you.
Is my screen still sharing, or is it good?
Oh, not anymore.
Okay, great.
Video, Professor. So thank you very much, Professor, for that discussion on people's behavior, which will really help our data protection officers to craft better policies. And of course, which will also help the NPC craft better regulations. Now, for our open forum, we would like to welcome Attorney John Bello, partner of Medialdea Bello and Suarez Law Firm and co-chair of the International Association of Privacy Professionals KnowledgeNet Philippine chapter, to help us moderate this session. Attorney John?
Hi, Joan. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Professor. And good evening as well, wherever you are right now. And thank you so much for gracing us with your presence, right? And it's truly an honor for me to be your moderator. Now, to start things first, I'd like to put some context for the Filipino, what you're saying, and like to explain to you the Philippine privacy culture. Now, before the law has been passed in 2012, the privacy culture like this, right? When you go to a bank, when you're applying for a job, right? And then your ID would most likely have your social security number, government TIN number, or government ID number, even the blood type, and then you give that ID to the bank, right? So that they can easily identify you and to process, let's say you're opening a bank account. So meaning, now if you put all those sensitive data in your ID, right? That is something which is really, really unuseful for, like, let's say in the United States. You don't put those things in your ID at all, right? So before the Privacy Act was passed, the privacy is really more of like what you mentioned a while ago in your presentation. It's really more to protect your to protect your reputation than anything else. That's what we mean by privacy before. In fact, we talk about there's no exact word, Filipino word for the word privacy. If you translate it, there's really no exact word. In fact, one of the commissioners before, Don Di Mapa, he posted this on social media. Please translate it to Filipino the words National Privacy Commission, right? There's nothing there at all, right? You cannot translate it at all. Now, that said, you can easily see that unlike in the Western countries like Europe, privacy is more of a evolution done a revolution like in the Philippines. For them, it's a marathon. They've been running for decades. The Philippines is really a hard sprint, so to speak. So when you talk about privacy self-management a while ago, I think that's something that we really cannot do as a society as well. Now that said, knowing now the context of the privacy culture in the Philippines, what is your advice to the data controllers, to the data subjects, and to the regulators as well, right? Basing on the myth of the price paradox and your conclusion. Right, I think
I got muted.
Professor, there you go. You were on mute a while ago. Can you repeat what you said earlier? You're still on mute. Again, you're on mute again. Hold on.
Professor.
The professor is on mute.
We cannot hear you, Professor.
Someone keeps muting me.
Yes.
Hear you.
Maybe the controls, John. Somebody from the.
Professor, we cannot hear you.
Yeah, the professor on mute, John. Somebody, I think, is.
Okay, we are fixing the matter.
There you go.
Hello?
Yeah, that's better, Professor. I could hear you right now.
Okay, someone keeps muting me. It's not me. I'm like, if I click the button, it's like someone else is controlling it. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I could hear you now, Professor.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, I think someone else is controlling my mute button because it doesn't work when I click it. So it's out of my control. Yeah, I think that there are, in a way, some benefits about doing the privacy sprint and coming to it later on than the EU, because we really are in a really interesting age of privacy law where a lot of interesting new things are being done in the law. I think the GDPR is a wonderful law, but it's also, I think, has some shortcomings to it. It's not a perfect law. That there are a lot of problems with the GDPR, and it does rely a lot on privacy self-management. It has a lot of strengths, but it also has a lot of weaknesses. So I would say that, I think that this is a great opportunity to innovate on privacy law and some of the newer laws that are being passed and that are being amended, and that the new activity going on is really interesting. And I think that we're seeing some really interesting new solutions. And so I think that this is an opportunity as you're newer to a privacy culture, as you're newer to looking at how to regulate it, to look at this in a way with fresh eyes. I think the GDPR is a great thing to emulate, but also to look at this with fresh eyes to see ways that you can do better than the GDPR. In certain ways, I've been very critical of the law in California. California passed this privacy law. It was after the GDPR. And they recently did something that I thought was wonderful in their law. They put in a provision to regulate something called dark patterns, which are manipulative user designs for websites. And I think that's a great protection. I think that's a great thing. It's going to force companies to redesign their interfaces so that they are much more privacy friendly. This is something that I think, I hope that more laws start doing. And so I think over time, new ideas get into the law, and the GDPR is not the final word. I think that what we are seeing is that the rest of the world, the GDPR is certainly something that has, been an influence and a leader, and the EU is kind of led, but there are a lot of other interesting ideas outside of the EU from various countries as they're passing laws, and also doing innovative enforcement, doing a lot of different things for privacy that I think are very important and add a lot to this conversation. And so I think it is, while I think, absolutely, look to the EU, they've been running the marathon, but, there's a lot of interesting things that the sprinters are doing that I think, are worth looking at, and that ultimately I think, the EU should take a look at what's going on, because there's some, there's a lot of, GDPR is good, but I still think the privacy law still has a long way to go.
I see. Okay, so let's talk about GDPR for a while. So is there any regulator out there, any country can be the best model in terms of putting or regulating an architecture that will benefit the data subject without necessarily doing a regulatory overreach, so to speak?
I haven't seen anything that would be, close to what I would call perfect on my end. I mean, I would do privacy law a lot differently, but I mean, I think that there's a lot to be commended in the EU, but there's also some problems. I think that the enforcement of the GDPR has been relatively weak, and I think that one thing interesting is, I mean, I'm in a country that has long been criticized for its privacy law. The U.S. is often said, the Europeans will often say the U.S. has hardly any privacy law. We actually have a lot more law than you think, and we have a lot of flaws in our law. But one thing I think that we've done very well is the enforcement of the privacy law in the U.S. has been surprisingly strong in some ways. And there are some interesting surprises about the enforcement. One of the weird things that I find really interesting is that the main agency that enforces privacy in the U.S. is the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, and they don't have the ability to fine a company for the first violation. So a company violates the FTC Act, and the FTC can't issue a fine for it. And one might think, well, why should companies be afraid of the FTC? Because they can't fine you. The way it's structured is really interesting. The FTC has said, well, we will settle with you, but they force companies to agree to a 20-year consent decree. So companies have to now be audited by the FTC for 20 years. And a lot of the companies are like, we'd rather just pay the fine. We don't want you to be scrutinizing us, and we don't want to have to run everything by you for 20 years. So the company's almost like, without the ability to fine, the FTC has found a way to enforce that's been very effective. And ultimately, if you violate the settlement decree, then you can get fined. So that's how Facebook got the $5 billion fine. So it's interesting that there are a lot of innovative ways to enforce. Even with weaker privacy law, the U.S. has managed to do enforcement, and I think the EU should, in a way, look to the U.S. example, because I think that the enforcement of GDPR has not been as vigorous as it could be, in a way. I mean, it's been enforced, but I think it could be a lot more. So there are a lot of interesting things that I've seen where even with weaker law, a lot kind of depends on how all these things work. You can have a great law, but if you don't enforce it well, it doesn't work well. So it looks good on paper, but it's not really enforced. So a lot kind of depends on how things are implemented in practice and what is done with the law that one has. So you can take a weaker law and you can actually turn it into something stronger if you enforce it well, and you can take a stronger law and make it weaker if you don't enforce it well. And that's the one thing that's interesting about the EU too, is that it's enforced unevenly. Some DPAs in Europe are really vigorous about enforcing, and others aren't. And so they try to make it more even, but it's still a struggle there, I think.
Yeah, talk about enforcement. I'm very much aware in terms of violations of the HIPAA law. The regulation is really quite robust in terms of imposing fines on various violations, right? Now, you mentioned a while ago about dark patterns, right? I'm very, very curious about that. Now, in various social media sites, right? So when you go to a site, especially those, but of course, because free service, the value there is that they get your personal data and so on and so forth. They can give it to advertisers, right? So question for you there: how can the regulators in the Philippines step in, right, to protect the ordinary Filipino in terms of avoiding or addressing the dark patterns available on social media sites like Facebook, for example?
Yeah, well, I think you want to look to what is this interface doing, and is it crossing a line? And so some of them are deceptive. So they'll be, it'll make something look deceptive too. So or they'll be manipulative. So an example is, you get something, a box that says, will you let us share information with third parties? And there's only an accept button, and then there's like a small little grayed out button that says other options. And so a user then gets that, and it's just kind of okay. It's just really easy to click accept. It doesn't present a fair choice, right? It's not like yes, no. It's yes, but then some obscure other thing like other options, and then you click that, and then you get like, here's the whole privacy policy, and here's all this text, and you have to scroll through this and do a lot of work, and then finally you find the choice. That's a dark pattern, and you look at it and you kind of say, okay, is it treating the choice to protect one's privacy on the same equal footing as a choice not to as the choice they want, which is to share the data or to be able to use it the way they want. And I think that that regulators can look and say, well, if these choices aren't presented equally to the consumer, if there's an attempt to try to manipulate, twist the consumer's arm, push the consumer to make a choice to share data versus being neutral about it, that is a dark pattern. That's not fair. Attempts to deceive a consumer, trick a consumer into checking something, all these things are problems. And I think that you can look at the design and I think see pretty easily, is this something that's fair? Is it deceptive? Is it manipulative? And if it is, I think then the regulators can step in and say, this design is a problem, and we'll enforce against it. And over time, through examples and enforcement, I think that the enforcement agency can set an example that there'll be a bunch of the designs that are rejected and a bunch that are accepted as okay, and then that will signal what is okay to do and what is outside the line. And I think that would be a great thing, because I think that a lot more attention needs to be shown to this, because I don't think a lot of these are intentional. A lot of them are just unintentional, or no one's really looking or thinking about it. And I think with more attention to it, if folks knew, like, okay, you can't do this, I think that we'll see a lot less of this.
Okay, do we still have time for one more question, Joan? So ready, 10:30.
All right, one more quick question.
Okay, Prof, this will be the last question, right? So right now, the Philippines has adopted the accountability framework, right? You appoint a data protection officer, you have good governance, and so on and so forth. So in other words, so for example, we talk about adherence to privacy principle. The onus is on the controller to demonstrate by way of accountability they're complying with the privacy principles. So in other words, you have to be accountable, or the NPC will make you accountable. That's a current framework right now. Is that still effective, or should we move on to a more robust regulatory framework to protect again the Filipino citizen from various social harms or privacy harms?
Yeah. Well, I definitely think like I would definitely think, you know, we definitely want to do step 2, but I definitely want to emphasize that step 1, which is to have that framework, to have the accountability, to have the privacy officer, to have privacy governance at companies, is an essential step. And I've seen privacy laws that don't do that step, that skip that step, and those privacy laws never succeed, because ultimately the fact is that, you know, you can't enforce against every company. That there's not enough time and resources to do that. And a lot of things have to happen internally in a company. And so I think it's very important when laws force companies to have the governments to do risk assessments, to have privacy officers, to have internal governance, to have accountability. That is a crucial first step, and it accomplishes quite a lot. Now, I think that's still a step, that's a building block in a larger thing, which I think the next step then is to go out and enforce against dark patterns and enforce against violations and push the law further. But I think the foundation is key. And so I think it's very, you know, commendable when a law does that and lays that foundation, because that is the starting point. There are laws that I've seen in privacy that don't do that. They don't require privacy officers. They don't have any governance requirements, and you know, they expect companies to comply with them, and they don't. You know, the fact is that those laws never get complied with without the governance. When they have governance, they'll get compliance, and it happens, because I think it's very, very important to have that accountability and that internal structure, because at the end of the day, you can't enforce the most companies. You can't enforce against them. This is not practical. So there has to be internal commitment to following the law, and the best way to do that is to have the governance structure there to make sure that happens.
I see. I suppose, John, you're on the right track in terms of having an accountability framework. I think that's all for me, Professor John.
Thank you, John. And thank you, of course, Professor Solove, for that very thought-provoking discussion. We have listened with much interest in this morning's discussion. So again, we thank Professor Solove and Attorney John Bello for our session this morning. And now, ladies and gentlemen, this year is the very first year that the National Privacy Commission will have its Data Protection Awards, okay? So we have already tallied the scores, but we will announce it before this day ends. So we will have a change in schedule. We will have the awarding ceremonies after our last session this afternoon. And now next on our program is our Trust Encounters session. The first one dealing with e-commerce, and the next is on the telecommunications sector. This year's Privacy Awareness Week centers on the emerging data protection and privacy issues amid the pandemic. And now our new normal really saw us with increased dependence on connectivity and corollarily on e-commerce platforms. And now to provide us with a brief introduction, let us all welcome Deputy Privacy Commissioner John Henry Naga.
Thank you, Joan. Privacy Commissioner Raymond Liboro, Deputy Privacy Commissioner Leandro Aguirre, to our distinguished panelists, fellow workers from the government, friends from the private sector, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. As the Philippine e-commerce moves towards exponential growth, following an acceleration prompted by the pandemic, trust building emerges as a key strategy to capture the benefits of this digital economy, as well as keeping its risk at bay. In creating trust between users, consumers, merchants, platforms, and governments, data privacy and protection come to the fore with its positive contribution to this envisioned high-trust online environment. In fact, the Philippines e-commerce roadmap, where we aim to increase the e-commerce value to 1.2 trillion pesos by 2022 from 599 billion in 2020, and its GDP contribution to 5.5% from a 3.4% share includes data privacy and protection adoption as one of the pillars in realizing the success of the roadmap. However, the biggest challenge right now is creating a data privacy and protection framework that is compatible with the legitimate interest of actors within the e-commerce ecosystem. So more than ever, we need to put to light pressing questions. Questions like, how do we gain the confidence of users who want to be assured of their security and safety when using online services? And how do we ensure the legitimacy of merchants without resorting to over-collection of their data? And how do we ensure that data privacy and protection principles are held to the highest standard without overburdening e-commerce platforms and its merchants with regulations and compliance requirements that may hamper innovation and trade in online space? And when national security and interests are at stake, there is the moral, ethical, and legal issue on whether to share with government data of a suspected law-violating user. And then this leads to another pressing concern. How do we prevent misuse and abuse in third-party sharing agreements in general? With heightened use of digital services, we must raise more questions and begin finding answers as to how we can reach a common good. And while the regulatory regime online is far from ideal, we must recognize current efforts and measures in place to enhance trust. Here with us for the next session are some of the local e-commerce platforms, together with the very beautiful DTI Undersecretary Ruth Castello, to share best practices in protecting the privacy rights of users and merchants within their spheres. Perhaps from their existing tools and regulations, we can build on them further towards the desired environment that delicately balances the respect for data privacy on one hand and the other basic human rights while leading e-commerce to greater heights. Thank you. Back to you, Joan.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner John Henry Naga. And hopefully with this session, we will start to find answers on the pressing concerns of their new normal. And now I will not keep you waiting. And at this point, I would like to welcome our panelists to provide insights on the data privacy challenges in e-commerce during the pandemic from the perspective of leading e-commerce and mobile money solutions and payment platforms. Joining us this morning are industry leaders, Mr. Mark Frogoso, Chief Information Security Officer of GCash, Mr. Jason Brasileño of Lazada E-Services Philippines, Vice President, Head of Business and Enterprise Unit, and Dr. Ken Bailor, Chief Information Security Officer and Group Data Protection Officer of PayMaya Philippines. And as mentioned by Deputy Commissioner Naga, we are also very fortunate to have with us as a reactor Undersecretary Ruth Castello of the Department of Trade and Industry. May I now call our first panelist, Mr. Mark Frogoso. You have the floor.
All right. Good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here. My presentation this morning titled Thriving the Digital Economy in the New Normal. And I'd like to recognize a friend for putting this title for me because it prevented me from spending hours into thinking just about the title. This presentation is really going to be short. In fact, it will only highlight three things. Number one is me stating facts about the impact of the pandemic to both organizations and, of course, us, the consumers. Number two, the opportunity of doing online business, specifically e-commerce on the Philippine market. and how Filipinos are shifting to digital payment platforms, which somehow helps our economy during the pandemic. And number three, the data we put online. And generally, what companies do with our data and the data privacy challenges it brings to both organizations as well as to consumers. And we'll end my talk to share some of the things that we can do about these data privacy challenges. So when we talk about the new normal, two things comes off the top of my head. Number one, the impact it brought to the organizations. And number two, as we all know, to us, the consumers. For organizations, most if not all of them have been forced, for the lack of a better term, to adapt to the change in working conditions. Many acquired and implemented secure remote infrastructure to support remote work, bought additional computers or workstations and laptops for their employees, or even some have really provided competitive rates for their employees to have reliable internet connections to support remote working. Companies also have identified their most critical operations as part of their invoking their business continuity plans, and implemented skeletal workforces to support work on site, and of course, in compliance with government requirements. It also becomes an opportunity that sped up some of their digitization and digitalization efforts. But on the side, with all of these things happening or have happened, from the eyes of the bad actors, or so we call hackers, there's been a shift and or change of the attack surface. There's also some security controls that have been relaxed. For example, for some that's not ready, there may be personal devices being allowed to connect to organization's IT network. And this is really a big no from a security perspective, as this poses significant data leakage and malware risks to the organizations. There have been privileged access and or entitlements that have been granted to employees that enables them to do things outside of their day-to-day functions. For infrastructure, since there may be presence of legacy systems or even customized systems that requires on-site administration, fixing of issues and or patching may have been delayed due to manpower concerns, given the skeletal workforce. For consumers, and we all experience this one way or another, we all stayed at home and to limit outdoor exposure. When it comes to work, yes, we do remote work. We also learn online. Even our kids have online classes. When it comes to communications, we keep in touch with our loved ones and friends through instant messaging applications or video conferencing. And if you're like me that loves to travel, there's definitely a reduction in movement and travel. With health and well-being, there's focus on health and hygiene, and there's options for e-pharmacy and e-doctor or even teleconsulting. And since most of our time is spent at home, play and entertainment is done online, be it online games, video on demand, or streaming. And last on the list, but everyone loves, is really online shopping through our preferred e-commerce channels and brands. Focusing on Filipinos being online, right? I want to zoom in on the online shopping perspective. And when we focus on Filipinos being online, I personally got curious with our online presence and how do we compare with our neighbor countries within the region. Surprisingly, we are on top in Asia in terms of being online every day. And with our population, which is more than 110 million in the country, 74 million are internet users. And that's a staggering number, right? And the last one, isn't much of a surprise. Yes, we love social media, but I'd like you to focus your attention on the number in the middle, right? 70% of the 74 million are online shoppers. Now think about that for a second. That's around 52 million online shoppers. And when we talk about shopping, we need to pay, right? Citing from PayPal's consumer survey last year, these numbers are personally very insightful for me. 87% saw increased use in digital payments. 93% prefers to use digital payment over cash, and probably for safety and health reasons. 99% on the very right image that you see there, almost all of them plan to keep digital payments even after restrictions or even after the pandemic. 36% prefers digital payments primarily because of convenience, but almost half of them cited security as their top consideration when it comes to choosing which platform to use for digital payments. Now, these numbers from 2020 These are 2020 numbers. But when you look on the right, these are very recent news, right? This is just from April and May this year. So there's really a shift to digital payments. We can see that the consumers are shifting into digital payments. And one thing to note here is that these digital payment platforms really is an additional option for Filipinos to transact and or pay online, or even do business online, which then helps our company keep moving despite the pandemic. And with all of these things happening, doing online transactions and all, there's one aspect that we need to pay attention on. Yeah, it's also about our data, right? When we do things online, when we transact online, when we register online with different websites or applications, or even when we just browse online, right? It collects data. And when you ask, where's my data, as what our Spartan friend is asking here, it probably is in the cloud. And if you ask what's cloud, it's really just a bunch of computers out there on the internet. And really, I'm oversimplifying things here. With these organizations collecting data from us, consumers, you then ask the next question, right? As consumers, then what are you doing with my data? And hopefully it is secured. And another thing to realize is that every company is a data company, right? With that question, what are these companies doing with all of our data? Well, generally, it falls in most of these categories. Ultimately, to provide as well the best customer experience, right? So it's also for our good, right? These are all good things, but with all the good things, when we talk about data and information, there's also challenges to this, and it is about data security and privacy. So I've put in here 3 data privacy challenges from the point of organizations as well as consumers. And if the intention is not really to provide an exhaustive list, right? So number 1, it's about compliance to regulatory requirements, such as our own Data Privacy Act of 2012. If you think about it, compliance really is your license to do business. And so complying to the Data Privacy Act is a key enabler for continuous business operations. We all know that this domain of practice is fairly new, and so organizations will definitely adjust over time. And as a profession, specifically with our data privacy or data protection officers, it's quite new as well, and requires unique skill sets and competencies that bridges business and operations, technology, and compliance to the law. Number 2, with the presence of cyber threats and evolving threat landscape, with exponential advancement of technologies, with limited skilled cybersecurity talents and privacy talents, having a robust and mature cyber and information security is really a challenge. Number 3, really it's the overarching goal, right? Maintaining customer trust, achieving and maintaining customer trust with all the data breaches that's going on here and there, being on the news. This becomes really a challenge. So the question becomes, what can we do about it? I've put in just 2 items here, again, in addressing the point from the point of organizations as well as consumer. Number 1, we need to mature organization security and privacy capabilities, and we can do that with board and senior management commitment by having a well-defined security and privacy roadmap. This will enable organizations not only to achieve the basics of cyber hygiene, but will be compliant as a byproduct of the efforts and initiatives. And number 2, make our users aware through continuous, and I just wanted to highlight that, quote unquote, continuous security and privacy communications and campaigns. And probably that's not enough, right? In fact, let's be creative in delivering the messages, the campaigns, in a way that will get their attention, or even find a way that will enable them to tell their friends or families about it. I believe this ends my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Frogoso. And for our viewers, you may ask your questions on the chat box, and we will be able to ask our representatives from our e-commerce and payment platforms later during the open forum. Now, our next speaker is from Lazada e-Services Philippines. I'd like to welcome Mr. Jason Brasileño.
Hello, good morning, and thank you for that welcome. All right. So for my end, I'm here to represent Lazada and give you an overview. At the same time, share with everyone the key challenges that we have been facing in relation to data privacy. So for this morning, I'd like to focus first on three main topics. So next slide, please. So one would be the COVID-19, the role of the pandemic and the evolution of the e-commerce industry. Second would be more on our commitment as Lazada in terms of complying and making sure that we protect your data. And lastly, I would be presenting key takeaways on how we can continue to drive sustained success in this field of data privacy, particularly in data protection. So first, next slide. Let me first introduce with you the mission and the vision of Lazada. So for those that are not familiar, Lazada belongs to the overall Lazada group. So we are present in most Southeast Asian countries, and our mission is to accelerate progress in Southeast Asia through commerce and technology. Given that, we plan to serve 300 million customers. We plan to create millions of jobs in the e-commerce ecosystem and be able to do that by 2030. And in that sense, also power real, profitable SMEs across Southeast Asia. And in this sense, we have already extended it to micro sellers as well. So to do that, Lazada, next slide, is uh, recognizing that MSMEs are the backbone of a vibrant and growing internet economy. In fact, recently we have allowed around 100,000 of MSMEs to sell actively on our platform. This is more than triple our usual rate versus pre-COVID. So there was really a rise in onboarding of sellers. And 95% of our business are from third-party sellers. So these comprises a majority of MSMEs. So I won't talk much about the people that you see on the bottom of the slide, but these are various owners of business that have been helped by Lazada over this pandemic. Moving forward, so e-commerce platform, as we see, have enabled the market access not only to all big players, but majority to those included in the MSMEs category that used to be dominated by big businesses. So our business model is utilizing a marketplace platform that connects sellers to customers. So we're definitely like a marketplace. In this sense, we enable ease of doing business by allowing ease in the onboarding process and low entry and operating costs, so that most of the earnings would go back to our sellers or the MSMEs. We also provide our partners, the MSMEs, with nationwide market access, including marketing and other value-added services, which, to name a few, includes logistics, payment centers or payments, customer care, and even protection for seller and buyer. However, jumping into now where we find ourselves in this pandemic, which would be the next slide. So COVID-19 impact on the digital risk environment. So this pandemic definitely, for one, brought an era where e-commerce is no longer just a channel. Rather, it transformed e-commerce into becoming a backbone of new opportunities, areas for people to bounce back from, and it allowed progress and businesses in terms of customer experience. However, as mentioned earlier, with more transactions, with more digital transactions coming into the field now following the pandemic, we see a rise, and it has really tested our cybersecurity or the cyber landscape. So with more people doing online transactions, more so the cyber threats followed and evolved and become more focused on these three key areas: phishing, scams, and fraud. In fact, the pandemic really tested our digital risk environment. And in the lower left portion of this slide, you can see an illustration coming from MOQ Digital, wherein it narrated the impact of the digital risk environment. So first, while it accelerated digitalization, it allowed employees, consumers, partners, and suppliers to be more connected. It also increased, or there was more spikes in our cyber threat activity, and it allowed people to exploit other people in this crisis. We also see an evolving government response and mandate, the way that we are seeing our laws now, particularly on data privacy, evolving, and that we also see more and more controls to be able to manage and eventually eradicate this pandemic. So we do have social distancing, among others. What created a major disruption was the supply chain. So globally, this includes even the digital security. In fact, during the first few months of this pandemic, it was difficult. Our logistics arm were heavily impacted by this, but we were able to manage it, and in fact, uh, bounce back from it. And lastly, people become more stressed, and anxiety is one of the key drivers right now for societal impact. And I think we'll see more of this. But in terms of the topic right now, what was important to note is that this study coming from Interpol, conducted middle of 2020, stated that for Asia Pacific, where Philippines is one country member, the major regional trends in this area includes COVID-19 related fraud and phishing. Hence, the three key areas that I highlighted above. Wherein more campaigns, as well as illegal online sale of fake medical supplies, drugs, and personal protective equipment came about. Related to that, cyber criminals are more exploitative and looking at vulnerabilities in the security, not just of organizations, but with more of the work from home scenario and the e-commerce, more so that they come into the picture. There's massive circulation of fake news, and uh, it does not help that from the study, the lack of a good cybersecurity awareness and hygiene uh, also allowed such things to happen. In fact, this was named as the main challenge in Asia Pacific region. So for this, what do we plan to do? So what does Lazada as an organization uh, commits to its customers? So Lazada, on the next slide, uh, has seen the context and the landscape, and coming from a risk management principle, understanding the context and applying a design fit for the current scenario, we understand and we put and we continue to put high value in ensuring data protection. So our current risk mitigation and protection strategies underlies 5 key concepts. In terms of data protection principle, since Lazada is operating in various Southeast Asian countries, we remain committed to upholding data protection principles when handling personal data and ensuring control. This is not just true for Philippines, but across the other Southeast Asia region. So we, as much as possible, we try to comply with the overall GDPR, but at the same time adapt a tailor-fit approach in complying with local regulations. In this case, our PDPA. Lazada's privacy framework, which is the second one, ensures that roles and responsibilities are defined and properly communicated internally. We do have our own onboarding and our continued education and awareness campaign that allows us to understand our roles as information controllers and processors. Third, in compliance to data privacy laws, which includes the countries to which we operate, we adopt a privacy by design approach. And we, as mentioned earlier, adhere to country-specific requirements. Fourth would be management of potential breach and escalation. This is where we have an internal privacy incident management and handling, which includes linkages to our developed business continuity and crisis management programs. And lastly, we also are putting emphasis on awareness and education. We ensure that employees are aware of their roles and responsibilities in handling personal data. And at the same time, we also endeavor to do the same to our business partners, such that to end, I'd like to leave the group with these key 3 takeaways. The major message that we would like to convey to this forum is that the challenges are there, but we understand it, and we continue to look into it, and we continue to address it, and we also enable everyone to remember that collaboration and education is key to driving sustained success. In fact, over the times that we were implementing our programs, not just on data privacy, but on the other programs that we have, collaborating with our regulatory partners as well as with our sellers and customers have been vital to us. Such that with collaboration and education, we're able to effectively manage data protection and mitigate properly, involving parties understanding the roles. With collaboration and education, we put emphasis on awareness and education as it plays a crucial role in effective data protection. And lastly, as to stress, the ongoing public and private sector collaboration is really the key for increased consumer and merchant education and empowerment. And this, we also thank our DTI partners, among others, for being with us as we continue to collaborate and address the e-commerce landscape. And for that, I end my presentation, and thank you for giving me this time.
Thank you, Mr. Brasileño, for that discussion. Ever since yesterday, we have been talking about a whole of nation approach on our country's road to recovery. And of course, e-commerce platforms like Lazada are really invaluable partners on that road. And for our last panelist for this session, we welcome Dr. Ken Baylor from PayMaya, Philippines. Dr. Baylor, you have the floor.
Thank you. So I'd like to start off on the presentation there. If you want to proceed, that's fine, or I'll share it. Yeah. So one of the big things also we saw in the last year and a half has been the whole COVID situation led to a massive embracing of digital shift really quickly. So a lot of people who were used to going to physical locations and doing that, they couldn't anymore. We saw a massive increase in demand for digital services, and it happened really quickly. And that led to this whole question of, well, how do we know this person is who we say they are? Because the other thing we started seeing is a massive increase in cybercrimes amid the pandemic. So the great thing about being connected is that people, even with limited connectivity, can get to you. The bad thing about being connected is a lot of the bad people can get to you as well. And the whole question then, and anti-fraud comes in of, how do we know our customers? How do we know what they're doing? What's the right level of judging risk? And how do we do this in a very respectful way, balancing trust of who they are versus who we are? And that started off, or I guess really propelled further the big push on anti-fraud that we did, and it's been working very well. And what we're going to talk about in the presentation is sort of a, why should people trust PayMaya, but also kind of the factors that many companies who are in the situation and also looking forward. So what have we done? Is this useful to you? And hopefully it will be. But the big push there is lots of anti-fraud work has been done. We've rolled it out in a very respectful way. We've looking at the right things to do, giving people advance notice of it, giving them sort of the opt-in of it, and that's kind of where we've gone. But when you start really looking at how do we do privacy, how do we do anti-fraud, how do we do that at PayMaya, it's done very differently compared to many others. And on the next slide, we'll kind of go through that, because I think this is really the secret of our success. So our DPO team, and currently it's around 4 people. How we built them out is, we didn't just say, hey, you've been appointed as a DPO. We've got a lot of very strong specializations. So we start off with people who've either done 10 years plus in areas like information security, or people who are also lawyers, and they've got really in-depth expertise in that area. And then we also do a lot of mentoring. So they've gone through, I guess, a mini MBA program on product development, doing startup work, how to open new markets. So they actually really understand business side of things as well. Because, in security, there's the concept of I'm right, but in the business world, there's kind of yes, but. So it's kind of bringing them together. How can they really add value and thoroughly understand and therefore influence product directions and decision making? And then after they have that, there's a lot of worlds on auditing, how to run practices. We train them very much on the Philippines law. And thank you, DPO ACE, for getting all of our people in there and certified. And then we kind of go a little bit further because we want to really learn what's the world's best practices. So they generally all go through the CIPP exam, and they all have and happily passed. And primarily we pick on the E. Why the E? Because that's GDPR, and GDPR is a very, very strong basis that we have that we use for everything. So that's kind of our floor. And whenever we look at things like, well, how do we trust other partners? We generally follow the best practices from there. But as our previous speaker, Professor, brought up, that's even not enough. We also have to look at, well, where's the world going? So we looked very much at the new California laws, like the CCPA, but we're also looking forward at the what we call the ratcheting one, which is where the law is going to get more stricter and more aggressive, and that's called the California CPRA. So you look at where the world is going, what are the, and how to get ahead of that curve. And then, of course, the CIPM is primarily about building a privacy program. So that's kind of what we're working on as well. So by getting all this together, so we now have people who've got really in depth in one area like security, and they've done their business work and they've got all their certifications, then we believe we've got a well-versed DPO. But one of the important things we do is we don't believe in training bonds. I know it's very common that if you pay for somebody to do training, certain exams, that they're stuck with you for another way. We just don't believe in it. We really believe that if you are willing to do the work, you should get your training, but also have the flexibility to move on to your career. Luckily that nobody's left us yet, so I guess we're doing okay. Let's kind of hit the next slide. And this is kind of, if you look at the bottom, when you're looking at rolling out product development, quite often people come up with a concept and then they do some research on it, and then they do some analysis and they run some numbers and they say, should we do X? Should we bring out this new feature? Should we bring out this new thing? And then quite often it goes to development and then it goes to test. And if you're the traditional DPO, you get pulled in right at launch of, hey, we're launching this thing, it's going live in 2 weeks. And you suddenly go, what are we doing? This is a little bit crazy. And we've seen that a lot. And one of our big pushes in both the cybersecurity world and the privacy world is that's not a good place for a DPO to come in. We need to do this massive shift left approach. And that's why we trained our DPOs the way we are. So, they understand the law, they understand what the business is trying to do, but they also understand all the hardcore concepts of privacy by design. So well before it ever gets to development, we shouldn't be collecting the minimum information, retaining it for the minimum amount of period of time. It should be used for the minimum purposes and should be gotten rid of or anonymized later. But it's all about what's the customer balance, what's the customer risk, is this the good thing to do? We look at the balancing side of things and we look at the privacy risks. And one of the core things we have is a data classification grid, which says the world is broken into 5 different levels of risk based on sensitivity of the data. And if you need to access what we call very sensitive data or level 5 data, you've got to have all these massive list of security controls on it. So if somebody comes to us and says, hey, I want to access this sensitive data, even before we get into the should you, we get into the can you do all these security things. If the answer is no, then our answer is no. So we bring that in, and that philosophy is actually permeated right through the company. And we started this in 2019, well before the pandemic, but it's been key for a lot of our success, and it permeates right throughout. So we've got a very strong respect for data privacy, but that's really built on, let's be honest, a full respect for our customer. And the customer are data subjects and Filipinos. So we'll hit the next slide, please. So the other thing, of course, is we can control what we can control, but there's a lot of things we cannot fully control, and that's our partners. And as we know, in the payment ecosystem, we have to have a lot of partners. So one of the things we looked at originally is, well, what's the best way of doing that? And if you said fundamentally, there's 2 ways of doing things. There's the kind of American way, which may not be the nice, most respectful way of calling it, and there's the GDPR way. And in the old way, which is the US way of doing things, you sign up as a partner and somebody gives you this massive security appendix, and you either, if you want a deal, you say yes, and if you don't want the deal, you argue. And but the question is, we've seen a lot of breaches on the US model. Is that the right way of doing things? And we don't think so. What we believe the European model is a better model, where we say, this is your level of risk. Let's do full due diligence on you through open conversations. And again, our DPOs are very technical, so they can kind of get in on those. They can evaluate those. So it's not enough to sort of get a contractual sign off. You need one, that they're going to treat the data with at least the same controls as you have. You actually have to do that due diligence. And that's kind of what we do. We do a very advanced due diligence. Because whether it's at the API level or the data flow level, and then if it's leaving the country, you've got to look at the whole data transfer mechanisms. And again, we leverage standard contractual clauses. We supplement those with the GDPR, extra add-ons. We supplement those with the Filipino laws. We supplement those with some of the best practices we've gotten from CCPA and CPRA. And that's kind of how we do our partnerships. Whether it's a vendor or a partner, we really kind of get in there and if we can help them improve how to do security and privacy. That's kind of a big focus for us. So this is kind of why we build trust, or how we build trust. And then on the next slide, we'll kind of talk about how we work with external stakeholders. So one of the things we love doing is collaborating with our other fellow DPOs. So we're becoming more active over time in the IAPP and in some of the local chapters as well, like the NBFI group. And we share best practices, what we do, and try and improve and try and learn. That's a big open conversation we have. When there's fraud, we try and have literally exceptionally reactive groups that pop up, try and get it solved through friendly collaboration, very kind of openness. So our focus is never litigation. Our focus is risk mitigation, protect our customers, save their money, build confidence, build trust. That's really our goal. And then whenever a merchant has a problem, also here's a 72-hour, notify us and we'll work on it, but we'll try and add value. You don't want to be the 500th person phoning up going, what's happening? Drop everything in your forensic investigation and tell me. That's not helpful. So we'll try and ask some key questions, add some value, but our goal there is to minimize their damage and help our customers and just help the whole ecosystem. And then with our vendors, strong implementation of data controls. If there's problems, identify it. But the big focus here is get the whole system safe, because that's what Filipinos want to do. If your money was lost and it's us or Gcash or whatever is the brand, it really comes down to the ecosystem. It's all about securing that, because that's what's good for our people. Next slide, please. Oh, maybe that's it. But the other thing we also do here is we focus a lot on collaboration with law enforcement, bringing up good quality work there, and building trust, because that's a very, very important thing. And it's all about, for us, really kind of giving back on everything. So that's pretty much how we do it, and what's definitely working for us. So thank you, and I'll pass it back.
Thank you, Dr. Baylor. And now we are very fortunate to have with us as a reactor, Undersecretary for Consumer Protection, Ruth Castello of the Department of Trade and Industry. Attorney Ruth B. Castello was admitted to the Philippine Bar in 1994 and has since been continuously engaged in the practice of legal profession. Her experience as a lawyer extends to government practice when she served as city attorney from 1994 to 2001, and where her litigation skills were honed. In this line of work, she was exposed to construction and government infrastructure projects, reviewing construction contracts and ensuring proper implementation of the same. Prior to her appointment as DTI Undersecretary, she was admitted as construction arbitrator for the Construction Industry Arbitration Commission by virtue of her extensive exposure to construction contracts and litigation arbitration of construction disputes. Ladies and gentlemen, Attorney Ruth B. Castello of the Department of Trade and Industry.
Oh, hi. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, and thank you for the invitation. I'd like to, of course, congratulate Commissioner Raymond Liboro for the successful webinar. It's kind of brief and very concise, and the topic is very important, especially these days. We all know that the pandemic has allowed, 2020 has allowed the Philippines to quickly shift and adapt digital transformation. It was very important. At least in 2020, despite the pandemic, we were all able to allow our children to go to school, businesses continued, and government still continued to function despite the pandemic. We were able to still somehow deliver basic services despite the limitations of face-to-face transactions, which were not allowed. And then we, of course, had to be resilient. Physical distancing was very much limited because of digital technology. And we know that the importance of this, and e-commerce has really soared very high. In the Philippines, you would note that our consumer complaints involving online transactions soar 600% higher than 2019. We had around 1,500 complaints in 2019, and as of end of 2020, we had around 16,000 consumer complaints involving online transactions. So you would see you would see how much the Philippines has improved in the use of e-commerce. Also we also note that in the Philippines now, from 23 million users of 2010, in 2010, we have around 73 million now, according to the World Bank Digital Economy Report of 2020. And then in the Philippines also, a lot of us would go through social media and spend maybe a minimum of 4 hours a day on social media. And that would include, of course, online shopping, and then digital payments is also very important. I'd just like to react to the payment schemes that were presented, PayMaya and the other one. There are a lot now of digital payment schemes that can be used by Filipino consumers. But the thing is, there are also certain restrictions or conditions for us to be able to do this. Like now, you would note that the Philippines, of course, is trying to improve our digital infrastructure, and which is very important for digital payments. And then, of course, we will also have to take into consideration our data privacy and consumer rights. Commissioner Liboro would know this, not on digital payments, but digital technology per se. Commissioner Liboro, you would note that I called you several times on the QR codes or the data gathered by various local governments in the National Capital Region alone. So we would note, I'm sure a lot of consumers would also wonder how the data that we provide is used or is stored or destroyed by those who gather it. So also on digital payment, it's good that a lot of digital payment schemes that we have now collect very little data. It's just important. It's just also really unfortunate that have digital access or access to digital payment gateways. We have only around 30% of the country's population has engaged or has access in banking. So it's probably one thing also for the government to look into this. And of course, that will necessarily include the data privacy and upholding of consumer rights. The consumers will have to have the choice to use digital payment or the analog payment mode of payment in their transactions. Online shopping has soared, and government, it's actually the whole of government approach, not just government, but I will mention first that we need to be able to implement safeguards. Also, the private sector can be engaged here. They can very well help in protecting the personal data gathered from the consumers. And of course, we also need to increase consumer confidence. It's good to know that a lot of payment schemes now are available in the Philippines, but we would like to also, of course, urge these digital platforms or digital payment companies to make sure that consumers are confident in the use of these digital technology. And then we, aside from, of course, having the trust on the digital platforms, the payment gateways also need to be trusted by consumers. I'm a consumer myself, and of course, I have to choose which gateway I would like to use or which gateway I am confident of using. And this will have to be available. Also, the choices should have to be available to the consumers, and we need to build them confidence. The digital payment companies here would note that the use of the consumer of the digital payment gateways, aside from the confidence the access that they have, is also the confidence that they should have in the company. It goes the same way for digital platforms, online shopping platforms. We always say in consumer protection that the best way to earn patronage of the consumer is to earn their trust first, and to earn their confidence, and to make sure we promise, we deliver what we advertise, and then we continue this and sustain this until we get more patrons and we get more people to have trust in our system. Thank you very much, NPC, and thank you to the platforms, or not only to the online platforms for shopping, for consumer online transactions, but also the payment gateways that make it easy for everyone, especially during this pandemic that we all would want to avoid face-to-face transactions and facing crowds. So the digital technology that was almost unheard of 15, 20 years ago is now here, and there is no other way to go but up. We need to be able to improve e-commerce in the Philippines. And I'd like to just take this opportunity to invite all of you also to contribute to the e-commerce roadmap that we are currently updating in the DTI. You might want to send us inputs or information. Maybe we can send you drafts of what we already have. It's going to be helpful if we have the side also of the, not only of the online shopping platforms, but also the payment, digital payment systems that you all have that we can include in the e-commerce roadmap. Of course, this will take a lot of work. It's a work in progress, and we have no choice now but to develop it, given the circumstance that we have in the Philippines, and given this pandemic, which we don't know exactly until when it will last. So this is the new normal. We are already here, and I don't think there's ever going back to the old normal that we had. So e-commerce is here to stay, and of course, we can work hand in hand in making this progress some more in the future. So thank you, NPC, and thank you everyone for your time.
Thank you, Yusek Castello, for your insights. And we at the NPC are really glad to facilitate this discourse. So for now, we have a lot of questions on the floor, but we only have time for one question. So I would like to welcome our panelists. And this question is addressed to all panelists, Mr. Frogoso, Dr. Baylor, and Mr. Brasileño. What was the biggest privacy challenge that you encountered in the previous year, and how did you address that? Because our consumers are very, there are a lot of issues and questions posed by our viewers, but we would like to know what was the biggest privacy or security issue that your platforms and companies have experienced in the last year.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
I'll start.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Ken, go ahead. Yeah, I go.
So I think a lot of it was, we're very interested in privacy as a key fundamental of ours, but on the other hand, a lot of the key assumptions of people will be physically present in a certain place that changed massively during COVID. So then the question is, especially with all the fraud coming through, and one of the big issues we have, of course, in the Philippines, so we're not quite at a unified ID yet. So there's multiple different versions of it. So it's how do we combat fraud, do it in a respectful way, balance all the rights of everyone, and also if there are changes that we have to make, how do we implement that across the groups? Because one of the things we very much focused on is breaking down silos. Sort of from a data science perspective, from an anti-fraud perspective, from a IT perspective, from a product perspective, and then of course we're a mobile app, right? So when you bring it all out, you then have to kind of jump through the Google hoops and the Apple hoops. So it was kind of a how to do the right thing, balance the right things, protect people's money while protecting their privacy, how to do that and bring that fundamental change across the organization in a really quick manner. That what I think was hard for us. I think it was hard for everyone, but I think we pretty much got there. But it was definitively a fast shift.
I think yeah, Joan.
Thank you, Dr. Baylor. And I think I've heard Mr. Frogoso.
Yeah, so I think for us, it's also the same thing. I guess it's really about making sure we're ready as an organization. So really operationalizing data protection and data privacy within the group, and all the capabilities should be ready. I think that's the biggest challenge there, because we've seen and to Ken's point, right? We bridge across all of the line of businesses. So and making sure that the organization is ready, as well as because right now there's an awareness going on with users, right? And then they somehow exercise their rights, right? So you have a shared email distribution list wherein you then see a lot of incoming inquiries or even complaints going on, and if your team is in the data protection or data privacy group is not ready to address all of these things, then basically you're not in the right situation or scenario. So yeah, I'm aligned pretty much with what Ken mentioned earlier.
Thank you, Mr. Frogoso. And now for our last panelist.
Well, I think we all have the same sentiments coming from the same landscape. For Mark and Ken, definitely those were the key areas that we wanted to really handle and really wanted to improve. The shift from the normal flow of e-commerce to the pandemic situation was really different. And to add to that, people becoming more aware, becoming more concerned about their data, asking the hard questions. At the same time, from our end as a platform, making sure that we're able to also provide the best fit solutions. And it's hard because you'll have to do it across all ventures, not just for Philippines, but and across all the business. So it's really more of alignment. What are the good mix and in terms of both technical and administrative controls, and ensuring that we comply continually with local regulators at the same time with our regional regulations as well. So that being said, we continue to grow in this area. This remains still a challenge given the situation we are now, but to sum it up, it's a challenge that we are continually doing better, and we hope to be able to do more with the collaboration with all the business platforms, as well as with our local and international customers and our regulators.
Thank you, Mr. Brasileño, and to all our panelists, Mr. Frogoso, Dr. Baylor, Mr. Brasileño, and our reactor, Yusek Castello, we thank you for today's session. Thank you for sharing your insights on how our online platforms have performed during the pandemic, and of course, the future projects of our online platforms. And now we proceed to the next panel of industry leaders and experts who shall discuss and provide highlights on their varied perspectives in gaining and retaining consumer trust in the telecommunications sector. Joining us this morning are our panelists for today, Ms. Lea Camila Jimenez, First Vice President and Chief Data Privacy Officer of PLDT, Ms. Lea Angeles Reyes Reconalia, Privacy Communications Manager, and Mr. Abraham Elazar Quintos, Privacy Compliance Manager of Globe Telecom Incorporated, and lastly, Attorney Adele Tamano, Chief Administrative Officer of Dito Telecommunity Corporation. May I now call our first panelist, Ms. Lea Camila Jimenez of PLDT. Ms. Jimenez, you have 10 minutes for this presentation.
Could you project the slides, please? First slide, next slide. Okay, so I mean, during the what we all experienced last year, right? The whole thing on the lockdown, this whole pandemic, our primary purpose, our primary goal and reason for being as a telco is really to keep customers connected. So the most important part of our task and to maintain as well customer trust, right, is the ability to actually provide service during the time of the pandemic. But that meant, next slide please, that meant ensuring that access, also our own access, and of our own employees and our customers, access of customers to us was available, right? So all of the projects that are part of the transformation efforts of the PLDT group was a lot of them we fast-tracked because we needed to ensure people stayed connected. We stayed connected with all of our customers. And that meant providing VPN access to all of our employees who are working from home or part of the frontliners so that they can access PLDT platforms to enable them to continue to service our customers. Next slide. And that also meant that we needed to develop a lot of contactless touchpoints to ensure not just the protection of our employees, but of course our customers as well. And that meant the ability as well of our employees to continue to serve customers at home. Next slide. And all of this, all of our efforts, actually, it was a very busy time. When people would ask me, how are you guys doing during the lockdown? I think it was one of the busiest times for privacy because, again, we were fast-tracking a lot of things that were in the transformation project. We were also developing things, like I mentioned, contactless touchpoints, and all of that were all under review. We applied the same standards when it comes to privacy assessments because we need to ensure that not just our employees and our customers are safe from the virus, so that but continue to experience our service, but also to ensure that we keep safe the data that is provided by customers and employees. Right? We keep it safe from any potential threat and abuse. So even also our cybersecurity team was very busy during this time because, again, the way we work in PLDTs, we work hand in hand together with privacy, also together with the cybersecurity, because there are the cybersecurity assessments as well that we need to ensure and standards that we need to ensure were in place. Next slide, please. So again, privacy by default. The example would be this is one of the examples that that was set up. So online booking for retail stores. So you could actually, a customer could just go online, book an appointment, whether virtually or actually in store, right? So you don't actually have to go immediately to the store. You can just you can book. So because we also want to prevent, right? We want to make sure that we maintain the number of people, or we minimize the number of people that are actually in the store, and we would prefer people to actually stay at home so that it's safer. Next slide. Sorry, that's not the right slide. There are other slides. Next slide. No, sorry. There are 2 more slides before this. I'm sorry. There is the There's the virtual, there's slide 7, which is the virtual frontliners.
Yes.
I'm sorry, the slide isn't working properly. So anyway, so as the technical figures it out, so slide 7 was really about the virtual frontliners. So as you go into so virtual frontliners in the retail store. So for people who were not aware of of the announcement of online booking for the retail stores, and this is our behavior, right? As customers, we go to the retail store for if we have a question, right? So this is actually, you can what do you call this? When you go into the store, it can determine already. You can check whether if it's a quick transaction, meaning there's no exchange of goods, or let's say it's an upgrade, or you actually have to discuss lengthily with a frontliner, then you can actually just interact with a virtual frontliner also in the retail store, especially if you don't have, let's say, access for wherever it is that you may be. And the next slide. This is actually an internal program that was set up. Normally, when we get, let's say, and we all do this, right? If you're in the service industry, a friend of yours has a request or wants to just get an endorsement so that certain aspects of their service are addressed. Normally, that's just done through email and endorsed to the customer care unit. But what we have done is we have enabled also this ability for employees to create tickets on their own so that it's queued properly, so that nothing is missed. That's why the program is actually called Sana All, because now even our employees can endorse. All employees can actually endorse, and it goes through the same funnel as if you were what you call this in the store or calling the hotline, right? Next slide. And then of course, this program started, I believe, 2019. This is what we call the Smart Caravan. This is a program that we do this is a cyber caravan, smart cyber caravan, but we're just calling it cyber caravan already. This is a program that actually educates parents, teachers, and kids on protecting yourself online, internet safety, child, anything on child abuse that's online, so that people are aware. And together with that, cybersecurity and data privacy is definitely tackled. And last slide, please. And to further our commitment to protect, right, customers, we actually this month we we actually blocked 4,000 sites that were for the fight of for the effort in fighting child abuse. And we have also partnered with UNICEF to apply their assessment tools, and this is actually a policy that we have within PLDT. So it is actually, as all projects are assessed against this lens as well. So in terms of, again, I'm not gonna, the track of this presentation is really showing you what, particularly during the pandemic, what we have done, and to ensure that customers stay connected, maintain, again, consumer trust. Consumer trust is, for us, very critical. I mean, it's embedded in our process because it's privacy by default. All of our privacy is actually part of the gating process from development down to deployment. So I think the previous panel talked extensively about their operations internally for privacy. We can discuss it if you want. But for us, what we do is privacy by default, not just by design. A lot of times it is by default. And what that means for us is privacy is part of our overall process from actual development down to actual deployment. So that's why during the pandemic, because we had to fast track a lot of projects and added more to ensure that people, that our employees remained safe, was able to access and able to still provide the service to our customers. Privacy and also cybersecurity, particularly this one, protecting children, is led by them, goes hand in hand in everything that we do in the PLDT group. Thank you. That's it.
Thank you, Ms. Jimenez, for that presentation. For our viewers, you may type in your questions on the chat box. Our panelists may also be able to answer the viewers' questions by themselves on the chat box as well. So now I'd like to welcome our next panelist, Ms. Leia Angela Reyes Riconalia from Globe Telecom Incorporated. Ms. Riconalia?
Hello, good morning. Please allow me to share my screen. All right. So good morning, everyone. Thank you to the NPC for inviting Globe to this conference today. I'm here to present Globe's privacy and security consumer trust pillars. So for a quick overview, please allow me to do a quick overview. So Globe the shift of our consumers towards having their interactions, activities, and transactions shifting to the digital space, we are aware that there is indeed a concern as to how we use their data. And what we'd like to let them know through the presentation today is that we as a company, Globe as a company, recognizes the role that we play. And we hope that through the initiatives that we show here today, we can show them that we're taking the responsibility very seriously, very seriously. But before I do that, first I would like to share a quick video. Oh, it's not playing.
Dalia? Viewers, would like to remind you that again, we will have our first Data Privacy Awards for the Privacy Awareness Week Awards. So that would be after our jurisdiction reports later this afternoon. Riconalia, are you back now? All right,
Hello?
so it seems, oh.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, can I kindly ask the organizers please to share the presentation instead? I'm going through some technical difficulties.
Yes, of course, we can do that.
If we can play the video.
I've browsed 8 sites for divorce attorneys today. I browsed 8 sites for divorce attorneys today.
My login for everything is Pauline at paulinefoo.com.
I love working working with you.
Me too.
Red heart emoji.
Pink heart emoji.
Yellow heart emoji.
Blue heart emoji.
I hate Lee though.
Puke emoji.
Puke emoji.
I am currently reading an article titled 10 Ways to Keep Sweaty Hands from Holding You Back.
My home is in 1,000 feet.
My heart rate is currently 150, 151, 152, and back down to 150.
On March 15th at 9:16 a.m., I purchased prenatal vitamins and 4 pregnancy tests.
The number on my credit card is 0237 1221 0725 All right. We can end it there. Thank you. So is people going about their daily lives, from commuting to work, going to the grocery, or watching a movie, but they're all unintentionally sharing information about themselves, from their purchase transactions to their personal interactions or conversations, their credit card details. So what Apple has kindly shown us here is a representation of what's happening online. And with this, we can see that they are right. Some things just shouldn't be shared. And we can see also the importance of privacy. So if we can move to the next slide, please. So for us at Globe, we've actually come up with 3 consumer trust privacy pillars so that we can place into buckets all the initiatives that we do to ensure that we build and foster our consumer trust towards privacy. So first is transparency. It's really about keeping our consumers informed about what we do with their data. And then accountability is being responsible for the security of their data, and empowerment is bringing that control back over to our consumers in terms of their data. So I'll share more on each of these pillars in the next few slides, starting with transparency. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Hello, if we can move there. All right. So with transparency, it goes beyond keeping our consumers informed. We also believe that there is a responsibility to ensure that they are able to understand the communications that we put out. So it starts with making sure that it's all communicated in a simple language, simple but concise. So simple, it's easy to understand, but concise, that it doesn't compromise the important information that needs to be imparted to them. And then aside from doing that, how we do that is Globe has actually allocated resources specifically to be able to do this for our consent statements and other information about privacy. And we also plan to move this forward by creating another language or a local language option for these communications in Filipino. So aside from language, we also want to make sure that privacy is easily accessible to our consumers. At globe.com.ph. And then for accountability, which is our next pillar, it's really about the development of processes, the continuous development of processes for compliance. So we have a specially designed process called the Privacy and Security Risk Assessment at Globe. And all of our initiatives and projects, regardless of scale, scope, or size, have to go through this process and achieve that certification to be able to deploy their project. You can see the parts of the PSRA process also in the slide before you, but moving forward from compliance, we also believe that there is a responsibility to make sure that our employees are properly equipped in terms of their knowledge for privacy and security. So how do we do that? We launched e-modules, which are mandatory for our employees to take on privacy and security. Last year, we had a completion rate of 76% out of our 8,000 employees, and we hope to build this percentage each year. Aside from that, we also have engaging activities such as ISTP month, which we had this month of May in support of Privacy Awareness Week
for the NPC. And we also launched a chatbot internally called ISCO, which is the ISCP support channel operator. And information about privacy or security as a whole. And lastly is the effective internal communication channel. So formed, Globe APSA is comprised of 80 members from Globe who are all advocates of privacy and security, and one Globe PSC, more than 50 members from Globe affiliate companies. So with these two groups, we are able to assure that we can easily disseminate any important information or updates on privacy and security. And then lastly, we have our last pillar for the next slide. Next slide, please. If we can move to the next slide, please. Oh, there. Okay. So lastly, as I spoke of earlier, we have empowerment. So our commitment towards empowerment, privacy and security education. So in partnership with Optus and Singtel, Globe started the digital thumbprint program, wherein the goal is to educate the youth about digital citizenship and the responsible use of technology online. So this was the curriculum was actually integrated by the Department of Education into their K-12 curriculum. It's comprised of 5 modules that you see on your screen. Aside from this, we also joined hands with the NPC in their Kabataang Digital program. So out of this was the birth of a privacy children's book called A Safe Space, which was a partnership with Canvas. And then lastly, is something very exciting for us is the privacy consent dashboard. So this is something that we're actually hoping to launch by the end of this year. What that privacy consent dashboard is that it unifies all the consent preferences of our be able to opt in or withdraw at any time for any of the consent that they have provided. And then with the last slide, next slide, please.
Your last slide. Mr. Cornelio, we can see your last slide regarding trust.
All right. So I'd actually like to end with all the pillars that we have shown here today. I'd like to end the presentation with a quote from our Chief Technology and Information Officer, Mr. Gil Henyo, saying, "Trust is hard earned, but easily lost." And we at Globe carry this with us through all the actions and initiatives that we do. So we hope that in seeing this, we're able to assure our subscribers and our customers that we are indeed their partner in ensuring their data privacy, in asserting their data privacy rights. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Cornelio, for sharing Globe's initiatives. And now for our last panelist this morning, I'd like to call on Attorney Adele A. Tamano, Chief Administrative Officer of Dito Telecommunity Corporation. Attorney Adele?
Thank you very much. I feel very honored to be invited here. I'd like to thank Commissioner Liboro and if you'll allow me, my friend Deputy Commissioner Naga. It's an honor to be here. I think I'm with some real data privacy experts. I will start off by confessing I'm not a data privacy expert. I'm really more on constitutional law. That's why I wanted to start off my presentation, if we can go to the next slide, with a bit of a framework first on really the legal basis for data privacy and how we will apply it to Dito Telecommunity. The great thing about being part of Dito is we're starting from scratch. And so these data protections, this really a strong advocacy on earning the consumer's trust, no, by protecting their information, by protecting their privacy rights, is something that we get to build from the ground up. So let's start with the legal and historical perspectives. So I start off with a view, and I think I want to relate this to the idea of privacy rights in our country. If you take a look at the US, I'll skip the European Union part. If you take a look at the US and their own constitution, they actually don't have an express provision on the right to privacy. And I find that very interesting because as the US Constitution developed, the privacy rights was read into their different constitutional rights, such as the right to due process, which, if we go to the next slide, is very different from in the Philippines, because from the onset, as early as our own 1935 Constitution and then the 1973 Constitution, and more so under the current 1987 Constitution, we made an explicit constitutional protection of our privacy rights. And especially more so under the 1987 Constitution because of the historical context going through the martial law years when the Constitutional Commission decided to talk about rights to privacy. They wanted it in a really more robust form. And as the law developed in the Philippines, we came out with our own Data Privacy Act of 2012, which is the baseline privacy regulation. And similar to the European Union, the Philippines does follow a rights-based approach to privacy. Now, let's go up. So we've looked at least the national level. Let's go to international law. So from a global perspective, the UN Declaration of Human Rights, in fact, already contains a specific protection in regard to the right to privacy. And this is even encapsulated as well in the ICCPR, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. So regardless of whether you talk about constitutional law, whether you talk about statutory law, or whether you talk about international law, privacy rights are really gaining prominence. So if we move on to the next slide, please. In Dito, we want to go beyond that. We want to go beyond merely just complying and following the legal basis for it, because we believe that if our consumers, if our subscribers feel and believe that their information rights and their privacy rights are protected by our company, then that will engender trust. So it is not just actually achieving minimum compliance. We want to engender that trust with our public because, and this is because of abuses that have happened over the years in regard violation of privacy rights. I think a very famous example of this is the Uber God view. I don't know if the people who are joining us today are familiar with this case, but there was a case wherein a company or companies were given access to the use of Uber of its employees so that they could really check if they were using the vehicles for work purposes, and also to see why were they late, what areas they went to, and the view was that this violated the privacy rights of the Uber riders. No, so I'm giving a real world situation of how because of companies like telco companies or other companies like Uber who get a lot of data, how data that we have can actually be misused. No, and we want to go beyond that. So if you go to the next slide, the next slide is really about creating that consumer trust. We believe that if our consumers believe that their information and data is well protected in Dito, then we see it as a way of creating a loyal customer base. And that's a great thing because we are really starting from the ground up. So as we build our company, as we build our subscriber base, we do want to create what we would call a culture of privacy, meaning that we collect and use data only according to what our customers know, secure the data, and putting our customers first. Very similar to how the pillars of the DPA, right? We always talk about transparency, using data only for a legitimate purpose, and also proportionality. And I'm sure in the questions now, there will be some questions related to this. If you move on to the next slide. So again, one of the very interesting things about our company is that when DITO was established, protection of information was really at the cornerstone of, and allow me to say this, quite unique about DITO. Because part of the bidding process, when we went to the bidding process of becoming the third telco, one of the requirements of the NTC and the DICT, which we believe should actually be a standard that is applied to all telcos, is that we had to submit a cybersecurity plan that would be vetted by the National Security Advisor and then later submitted to the DICT. And we have complied with this. We are proud to say that actually this is in line with the National Cybersecurity Plan, and we, as far as I know, we are so far only the only telco that is compliant in submitting the cybersecurity plan. So it shows you that from the very onset, protecting data privacy is really in the genetics of the of DITO itself, no? So in terms so that's the security element of creating that trust through privacy. There's a management element there. I'll talk about it a little bit later on in regard to dedicated platform that we use for managing the information that is given to us. And of course, the transparency and customer centricity, which I think is something that both speakers also did talk about. So if we move on to the next slide, please. When we talk about security, again, aside from the cybersecurity plan, we have invested, I think as of this year, we have already invested 2 billion in terms of creating really a strong cybersecurity system. So that is putting our money where our mouth is. So that when we talk about really protecting data, these are not just platitudes. We are investing in our infrastructure to really have a very secure network and operating system. If we go to the next slide, please. The next slide that talks about the DPAS, which is really, when you talk about data protection service, this really it's I guess the simplest way to explain this, we will be using a suite of cloud-based data protection software, and really the idea is to ensure that the data that is provided to us is kept safe, and if there are any let's say a data subject access request, we can be able to address these requests very promptly and very accurately using this DPAS system. We can move on now to the next slide. And even in regard our privacy statements, we adhere to the DPA's pillars on transparency. One of the things that I personally did participate to some extent was when we were crafting the data privacy statements. We tried to make it as simple as we could, and we also had our own data privacy, DITO's privacy promise to our consumers. No, because we know that we do provide a public service, and it is incumbent upon us to protect the information that we do get from our subscribers. Maybe we can move on to the next slide. And yes, customer centricity. Again, we endeavored. For those of you, I know DITO is still quite a new telco, and perhaps not many of you have gotten to try our service. But we use a DITO app, and we've really simplified how we use the app and how we provide, for example, the data privacy statement. It's very convenient. It's in the app itself. The language that is used is very simple and understandable because we do want to be customer-centric. We want to talk to our customers in the language that they understand, so that when they do give consent, it's an understood consent and not based on reading a document that is full of legalese and they can't understand it anyway. If we move on to the next slide. This is the second to the last slide, and really this I guess encapsulates a little bit of our aspiration, right? When we talk about DITO, we want to be known as a leader in technology and data protection. We will be bringing, and we have, in fact, in some areas it is already available, although we have not yet commercially launched it. We are bringing the what is called pure. Others would call it next generation 5G technology, and of course with bringing in the cutting edge telecommunications technology, we do recognize that all the more we need the protections so that the privacy rights and the personal data rights of our subscribers will be protected. So one of the things that we are actually advocating for, and this is my second to the last slide, is the creation of a regulatory sandbox. I think one of the earlier speakers did discuss this a little bit, but the basic idea here is because we're talking about cutting edge technology. We're talking here about the Internet of Things, AI, big data, and we want to create a regulatory system where we can actually try out these new technologies with actual consumers and subscribers, while at the same time protecting their privacy rights and their information rights. So we want that's one of the things that we will advocate for, and I think that segues into our last slide, which is really well, just two things. We look forward to partnering with the NPC as well as the NTC and the ICT in revolutionizing the telecommunications sector, particularly by bringing in the next generation data and also by adhering to the standards of data privacy. And the final thought really is that DITO is actually here because of a push by government. The third telco came in because of the complaints by Filipinos in general, needing to create competition in the telco space. We were, I think, the only one of 3 countries that actually had only 2 players in the telco market. And by bringing in a third player, we create competition, and competition is good not only for the players, but it's ultimately beneficial to our subscribers. And we are an example of how government actually took action hand in hand with the private sector. And that's why we're here, and we're excited to compete and of course at times partner with our fellow telco players like PLDT and Globe. That's the final thing that I'd like to say. Again, thank you to Commissioner Leboro and Deputy Commissioner John Naga and our friends at the NPC. Thank you for your time, and very honored to be given this opportunity to share our thoughts from DITO Telecommunity on the way forward that we see in terms of data privacy and next generation technology. Thank you. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Attorney Tamano. Now we have a lot of questions from the floor, and our panelists may be able to answer them themselves on the chat box. But we still have time for one more question for each of our panelists. So this question is directed to Ms. Jimenez of PLDT. We mentioned ensuring connectivity amid the pandemic, but how do you can you outline the safeguards that PLDT has during the work from home arrangement? You are on mute.
There, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So the work from home arrangement really needed to what do you call this for employees who were frontliners and are the ones who are assisting our customers. We needed to provide VPN access to all of them so that they are still able to what do you call this access the PLD platforms even from home. So that's one of the safeguards that we needed to put into place. Then, of course, constant reminders on because they are, again, from a work from home. I think I believe we ramped up also our awareness campaigns to ensure that they continue to maintain, right? Protect the data that they are acquiring or from the customers during that time. And at the same time, we had collaborated heavily with all of our third parties in terms of their connection as well and security to ensure that it's a closed loop from a security standpoint. And of course, reminders as well in terms of handling of data to ensure privacy, even from the third parties.
Thank you, Ms. Jimenez. And now we welcome Mr. Abraham Elezar Quintos from Globe to answer this question. Mr. Quintos, the question is, how does Globe ensure privacy and confidentiality of data when it shares the data with third-party providers? So how does Globe ensure that privacy law is still upheld when they share the information with third-party providers? Mr. Quintos?
Okay, thank you very much. Firstly, we are very grateful to be invited here. No? So to answer the question, there are two things that I really want to emphasize. The first one is in terms of contractual responsibilities and obligations, we make sure that every time before we share data to any partner or outsourcing company or third party, either a data sharing agreement or a data processing agreement is in place. What does that mean? It means that whatever information we will be sharing to any partner, it has a corresponding responsibility for the partner to perform based on their own technical, physical, and organizational protection. And secondly, in terms of all their employees as well. So that's number one, right? Number two, before we actually share the data to any third party, we have something that is called the vendor risk assessment. What does this mean? It means that if there is a third party that wants to partner with Globe, we do not immediately partner with that entity. What happens is that they have to go through a rigorous process of sending us their documents, answering our questionnaire insofar as data privacy and information security is concerned. We determine whether or not they are compliant with ISO regulations. We determine whether or not their data privacy and information security controls comply with Globe's. And if they do, that's the only time that we provide them with clearance, and that's the only time that we can ensure that they can handle Globe data. So clearly, there are two things. So there is a contractual protection in place, and secondly, there are technical and other regulatory protections in place before we actually share the data to any third party. So there, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Quintos. And my last question is directed to Attorney Tamano. Regarding concerns on security of the consumers, you mentioned that there is data protection as service. Can you explain to us in more detail how this data protection as service complies with the general data privacy principles of transparency, legitimacy, and proportionality?
Well, again, so the DPAS, the data protection as a service. I'm not a technical person, but as I understand it, it's a suite of these cloud-based data protection software. And so let's do them one by one. In terms of transparency, you're really talking about information from that is must be freely given, no? So that really forms more part of our privacy statements. But the DPAS actually, every time one of our subscribers would, for example, agree to our privacy statement, it's there. The information is there. So if there is a data subject access request, or he says, actually, I didn't give you consent, I think that's the strength of the DPAS that Dito is using, is because we have a mechanism that really is able to get this information rather quickly and efficiently. Now, of course, you could do it manually, as I've talked to my team, but it will be far less efficient for that. So that's on the transparency part. In regard the legitimate purpose, again, the DPAS will also have the information that will show if the data that was processed was really for a legitimate use. That would address the legitimate purpose, which is one of the pillars of DPA. And lastly is on the proportionality, which you don't collect more data than you need to. And again, our DPAS system is able to have all this information, and we're able to, as a system, ensure that we're able to monitor all this information and protect them for the benefit of our subscribers.
Thank you.
I don't know. Were you able to? Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yes,
Thank
I was
you.
able to hear that. Thank you, Attorney Tamano, for that. And that ends our presentation and panel for this morning on Trust Encounters. Again, we thank our industry leaders, representatives from leading companies, as well as our DTI Undersecretary for this session. And now we remind our viewers that the award ceremony will be moved after our jurisdiction reports this afternoon.
Sorry, can I just
this session again at 1 p.m. for our jurisdiction reports, okay? Colleagues from various member jurisdictions of the GPA will be joining us to provide their respective reports on how the jurisdiction handled the pandemic on a privacy standpoint, data privacy challenges encountered, digital tools and solutions employed, as well as lesson learned. Please log in using the link provided for in the respective emails. And thank you for joining us this morning. We will continue to loop videos and while you have your lunch. Thank you and see you later. are the new projects and activities of the National Privacy Commission. Now, we have a separate link for the session this afternoon on jurisdiction reports. So kindly leave this session link and log in to the new link, which has been emailed to your respective addresses. See you again later at 1 p.m.
We're here to protect your personal data. The National Privacy Commission is here to serve your data protection. We are one, we support in building a culture of privacy. To monitor, to ensure compliance of the country, to respect and to uphold your right to privacy. Driven by workforce, knowledge based and competitive, committed to excellence and innovative nation, to empower, to enforce in building a culture of privacy, to monitor, to ensure compliance of the country, to respect and to uphold your right to privacy. Rise up we're here to protect your personal data. The National Privacy Commission is here to serve your data protection. We are one, we support in building a culture of privacy. To monitor, to ensure compliance monitor, to ensure compliance of the country, to respect and to uphold your right to privacy. Driven by workforce, knowledge base and competitive, committed to excellence, enabling a nation to empower, to enforce, in building a culture of privacy. To monitor, to ensure